Hello and welcome to 6 Paths. Today I will tell you about what if Naruto was a god among men, part 3. If you enjoy the video, give it a big thumbs up, and if you don't want to miss future parts, then subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell notification. Now let's begin.
Most legal guilds didn't make much effort into digging out information about other guilds and the things that occurred within the world of magic. The act of information gathering wasn't at all at large within Fury, and mages fought many enemies they didn't know. For shinobi, intel was something that was vital and important to the daily missions. The shinobi world was marred with secrets and all other dirty things. That is not to say that Earthland didn't have its secrets, it had, but not many ventured into the lands of the unknown to get intel. The magical library was a great source for information, but the only problem was that the information there was available to anyone who wished, and the problem with mages was that most of them only went ahead to the library when there was something that they wanted. But Naruto had learned in his past life to understand that every bit of information was vital, and needed to be kept even if it seemed trivial. He never wasted the opportunity to pick up any information that was available. Another source of information for mages of this day was the Weekly Sorcerer, which gathered the latest information around the magic world. It mostly covered all good things occurring within the space of legal guilds, but there were still many things that happened outside of legal guilds. Naruto didn't depend on this magazine for information. He only bought his copy every now and then when things were a bit tight for his clones. Naruto found himself greatly amused when he saw an article that spoke about him. Of course, they didn't know his real name, but nor had his clear image. He wasn't that much of a screw-up to get everything about him out there to everyone while he was still conducting underground business. The Phantom is titled that the article called him. The name is what the Dark Circle was supposedly calling him since he had no name for them to use. It was alright, and a lot better than the names he was given and often called during the glory days. The change was nice. It was a little ironic and amusing that these evil people he hunted down were now calling him a demon, or a monsters, simply because he turned everything to ash. Another irony in the name was that he had been invited at Phantom Lord. There was little chance that he may be the Phantom of Phantom Lord. The idea was amusing. Naruto just wanted to see how much more of a guild Phantom Lord was, since it was ranked as one of the strongest guilds in Fury, and he'd come across two of its members when he was in his hunt, and they seemed to be on the same cause with him, although for different reasons. But they were doing what he thought to be good. Just to be sure, he decided to accept the invitation by the guild master. Another agenda he had by even accepting the invitation was that he wanted information on the Magic Council members, which wasn't easy to get. But someone who was within the 10 Wizard Saints had everything he may need. In this case, the guild masters. Juvia managed a smile when she saw the person she was supposed to guide towards the real headquarters of Phantom Lord. He was sitting on a wooden bench under a tree while looking through magazine. There was a small cup on his tight side that he took up to his mouth every now and then to sip its contents. She had come across that man a few weeks ago while she was on a job with Gajeel. They'd been requested to eliminate a dark guild which was causing trouble to some village. The guild was associated with Grimoire Heart, but didn't really contain as much as power as the real thing. By the time they got there, the entire guild had been destroyed, and it was only Gajeel's keen sense of smell that they were able to catch up to Naruto. He wasn't far though, and didn't seem to be hiding his presence, as they found him meditating under a tree, and seemed to have been waiting for them. Gajeel had been pissed because the blonde had done his job, and Naruto did nothing to appease the man. What he did was make things worse by saying they could take the credit for the destruction and he wouldn't say a word to anyone. Juvia had been the one to cool things down, as she clearly recalled the features Master Jose had told the Elemental Four. He had been the person their master had told them to be on the lookout for, and if they ever saw him, they should invite him to the guild. By then she didn't understand why Jose had given them such an order, but now she did. Keeping her warm smile, Juvia walked up to the blonde and took a seat on his left side. Hello, Naruto, that was the name he gave her anyway. Most referred to him as the Phantom, but he'd given her his name because he said he couldn't give such a beautiful woman a fake name. Naruto didn't respond as he paged his magazine to look at another article. After a few moments passed, he finally responded. Juvia, he said. I was beginning to think that no one was going to come and I'd wasted my precious time coming to this town. Sorry for making you wait, Juvia said. Juvia only returned in the morning after a job and Gajeel didn't want to come pick you up. Master had Juvia come since Juvia and Gajeel were the only ones who met up with you. Silently absorbing the response, Naruto nodded and picked up his cup. He sipped its last contents before throwing the cup onto the close-by trash bin. Why would the Dragon Slayer refuse to pick me up? The blonde asked, carefully, while keeping his eyes on the magazine he was reading. As far as he was concerned, he hadn't done anything that would plainly piss off the rumored strongest member of Phantom Lord. Juvia doesn't know, but Gajeel doesn't seem pleased with the idea of you joining our guild, Juvia said quietly. As rumor said it, Naruto was a lot powerful, and since the blonde had taken all of Gajeel's punches when they confronted, she assumed there was some truth to the rumor. Jose didn't speak much about the idea, but he was extremely happy about the idea of this man joining them. I see, Naruto said in thought before closing his magazine. Lead the way, he said, standing up so that they could head out of Oaktown since the real quarters weren't located within, but outside. Juvia nodded and stood up. She began to walk along the blonde as she led him towards her guild's main quarters. She looked at him at the corner of her eyes. He was walking on her left side. For someone of his reputation, he looked overly calm and much of a nice person. There was just no way she couldn't know more of him now, given that her guild involved itself in a lot of underworld business. They were mostly destroying them, though. To Juvia, he looked someone normal, other than the man the dark world painted him to be. Something on your mind? Naruto asked, looking at the blue-haired mage at the corner of his eyes. Juvia shook her head. You're part of the Elemental Four, nay? Juvia nodded. And your element is water. All members of your group are considered to be S-rank mages, even Gajeel, yes? Juvia nodded again. You don't look much of an S-rank mage. Neither do you look like someone who is called a monster for the destruction you've been causing to the dark guilds, Juvia responded calmly. This time, she was looking ahead the road. Naruto nodded. Appearances can be deceiving. Apparently that is true, the blonde mused silently. From what he has heard of the Elemental Four, they are strong individuals, and possibly carry the name of Phantom Lord on their shoulders via their efforts. From what he could feel off Juvia, she was strong, so was Gajeel, but none of them could be compared to Fairy Tail's Laxus. Perhaps Gajeel could do better since he's never actually seen the Dragon Slayer fight, but as far as his intel suggested, it was the former. S rank in the shinobi world wasn't a rank just given to anyone because they know how to fight. Just how powerful and famous was Kakashi? And yet he was ranked as an A-rank shinobi until they were forced to become stronger because of his presumed coming tyranny. In the elemental nations, Juvia couldn't be an S-rank kunoichi, but she could be no less than a seasoned jonin. His world was a tougher than this one, and achieving the rank of S was something that only a handful were ever able to achieve. As far as his intel suggested, Fairy Tail would become a winner if Phantom Lord ever clashed because of the sheer power the guild possesses. Their master is also no pushover, no less, and who could defeat the likes of Laxus Dryers in the Phantom Lord? Gajeel couldn't do that despite being number 2 to Jose. Tell me about Phantom Lord, Naruto said to Juvia. It would be a good way to kill some time and get more information out of the member of the famed Elemental Four. He did know she wouldn't tell him any secrets, but she would tell him more than enough to keep him interested. The way outside of Oaktown was short as Juvia had now gone past the barrier of Phantom Lord and was now tearing about her own territory. While she had something good to say about her guild, the wells were quick to dry out and went on to tell him more about her recent missions. To keep things interesting, Naruto asked a number of questions along the way just to show the mage that he was listening. It wouldn't do any good if he just allowed her to speak without paying attention. Naruto couldn't really form an idea about Phantom Lord after everything that Juvia said. She did paint a good image about the guild, but no one really painted a bad picture about themselves. However, he could see that Juvia wasn't a bad person at all. So this is the real thing, Naruto thought, looking at the real headquarters of Phantom Lord. The one inside Oaktown was a little bigger than this. But considering that the guild had many branches around Fury due to its large manpower, he could understand why they didn't need a building like that of Fairy Tail. Do you want me to give you some time? Juvia asked, her back against the entrance. Naruto had spaced out while staring at the building, and she assumed he was sorting out some thoughts. Naruto shook his head. No, he said, smiling a bit. He followed Juvia inside the guild and found it almost empty except for 4 people, with Gajeel included. Where is everyone else? Even though this is the main house, I'd assumed there would be a few more mages here. Most are in the HQ within Oaktown. Master prefers some peace around this place, Juvia said. Naruto nodded. After what he saw in Fairy Tail, he could understand. His eyes turned towards the eyes that were trying to peer into his skin and dissect him. The atmosphere was unsurprisingly tense. Yo! Naruto tried to lessen the tension by greeting the mages inside the hall. A few nods received his greeting before Gajeel shot him a nasty grin. Perhaps he felt threatened by the new arrival, perhaps he saw competition, or he was just excited to battle someone who was praised by his master as being powerful and someone who could potentially rival him. In his meeting with the blonde, Gajeel could tell that the blonde was strong. It was a pity he never got to smash him around. But if things went according to plan, he could do the smacking all he wants until it finally bores him. Come on. Master is waiting for you, Juvia said, trying to get the blonde off the radar of the others before something occurred. She certainly didn't wish to see her colleagues fighting with a potential new member. Right. The blonde followed the nurse-like mage upstairs until they reached Jose's office. Juvia showed him inside before turning her heels to go to chat with her colleagues. You took longer than first agreed upon, Jose said, turning his chair to face the blonde. He motioned for him to sit down before continuing. I was beginning to think that you were not going to come until one of my boys came running to me earlier, the master stated with a smile. Now, Naruto had dealt with all kinds of people before. If there was the devil in the room, he would know because he had once paraded the elemental nations as the devil. Shinobi like Orochimaru and Danzo, as well as Obito, were just fakes trying to play the devil. He was the real deal. Naruto had no troubles seeing through the masks people wore. While he couldn't exactly see what was behind the mask, the feeling he got from Jose made him frown inwardly while keeping a blank smile on his lips. I got held up in my last job and took longer because of it. But it shouldn't really matter since I have come. Naruto ended up with a shrug, not appearing to be all apologetic for taking long to come here. He wasn't going to sell himself cheap to anyone, not now and not ever. Jose nodded. I haven't really introduced myself, the master said, appearing as if he'd just forgotten about it. I am Jose, master of Phantom Lord Guild and a member of the 10 Wizard Saints. That is what anyone knew, and Jose knew it too well. He wasn't going to give away anything unnecessary. Naruto, otherwise known simply as the Phantom within the Dark Guild's circle, and lately by readers of the Weekly Sorcerer, Naruto responded, shaking Jose's extended arm. The coldness of the man's arm only made his blood run haywire within his blood system. The strange feeling was only reignited by the handshake, and it made him uneasy. You're becoming quite famous for someone who only entered the fray about 4 months ago, Jose said, narrowing his eyes a bit as he tried reading into Naruto's expression. But his attempt ended up in a failure as he couldn't even guess on what was happening inside his head. Infamous is the right word there, Naruto said, folding his hands across his chest, while relaxing his body posture. But it can't be helped when you do things that others aren't doing. In my case, I seem to be looking for a painful death by venturing into the land of vultures. It looked that way since he doesn't have anyone to back him up or look after his back. It wouldn't seem that way if you had allies to look after your back, Jose said as if he was reading Naruto's thoughts. The blonde shrugged indifferently before asking, I have honored your invitation to come here, he started calmly. What business do you have with me? He already knew the answer, but he wanted to get things started quickly so he can see where this will go. Jose almost frowned at the question. He'd thought that he would have gotten the feeling of just who Naruto is before they got to the serious matter, but he still got nothing. As impassive as the expression was, the smile that often flickered on his face gave away nothing. It was frustration that someone like him couldn't read just a person before him. He'd thought he would be dealing with someone who wasn't that smart, given that mages who often went on the destructive path around dark guilds weren't exactly bright, but he was proven wrong here. The Master of Phantom Lord leaned back to his chair, and then pulled it closer to his desk before resting both his hands on the desk. His eyes scanned each part of Naruto's facial expression for a few seconds before he finally responded. You've gained some attention from dark guilds. It isn't just dark guilds who are attracted to your activities, but other legal guilds have become attracted. Old story, Naruto thought mildly. How could he not know about that? He'd just read the Weekly Sorcerer magazine to know what was happening around the magical world, and that he'd gained some attention. It is understandable, the blonde said. You always become curious when something you don't know starts parading in the unknown lands to cause nothing but destruction. It is within the nature of men to be attracted to look when something that is potentially strong and eye-catching walk amongst them. Jose was quiet for a few moments as he studied word by word on what Naruto had just said. He didn't sound like he was happy about the attention he's gained, nor did he even seem to be displeased about the fact he's gained the attention of some people within the magical world. You have made quite a number of enemies by these activities, you know that, yes? Naruto gave the man a blank stare to tell him exactly what he thought of the question. You must have sponsors for protection when the real dark retaliates, otherwise you're only wishing for a painful death. A few moments passed, and Naruto put on a smile. Would you believe me if I told you that I'm actually on my own in this journey? Sure. When I started it I knew I would have enemies, but I never thought that it would be anything like this. At least the real things aren't taking any action, for now at least. But they will, soon enough, Jose pointed out rather firmly. I have dealt with a number of dark guilds and I know quite well that when they match out on a hunt for vengeance, they move out with their weapons prepared for vengeance, nothing less. Guilds like Grimoire Heart didn't mess around, and he knew well enough that one man couldn't take the entire guild alone, especially when it was someone like Naruto, who didn't give off a vibe of any bloodlust. I will just have to find a sponsor before that, now don't I? Naruto responded with a smile. He suppressed the urge to roll his eyes when the man he was speaking to nodded a few times in agreement with him. Yes, That is advisable, Jose added, reaffirming it with his nods. As one of the Wizard Saints, I must warn you that the Magic Council is monitoring your situation. From my experience with them, I know that they don't like anything they can't control. To give them an illusion of control over your actions, it would be better to join a legal guild, which they control. It was the idea that came during a recent meeting of the Wizard Saints, and he had gleamed wholeheartedly when he heard it. Naruto appeared to think for a moment, before asking, "Why are you telling me? Isn't it obvious?" Jose questioned before adding, "I want you to join my guild. If you join Phantom Lord, you will no longer have the Magic Council breathing on your neck, and as one of the 10 Wizard Saints, I can work something out to ensure that you all right in the eyes of the council." Naruto sighed. "I thought an offer like that would come," he said, showing no excitement or disappointment. "Like the 10 Wizard Saints, the Magic Council also has 10 members, yes?" Jose nodded. Naruto unzipped his cloak until about his chest and took out a file. He flipped some pages open, and showed Jose a specific page. "Are these some of those members?" Jose narrowed his eyes at the page, and saw 4 images of some of the members of the Magic Council. He looked back at Naruto before folding his hands across his chest. The council members weren't much of a secret to anyone, neither were the 10 Wizard Saints. In fact, the Weekly Sorcerer does sometimes publish members of the Wizard Saints. But even if it wasn't a secret, there were many who were ignorant about such information. He could say it without doubt that even someone like Gajeel or a member of the Elemental Four didn't know a single member of the Magic Council. Every guild master knew them, and there was no instruction to keep it hidden. Guild members just never bothered to look into such information. "Why do you ask?" Naruto closed his file and put back inside his cloak, but didn't zip it again. "You're not going to tell me then," he said, but he got what he wanted and that was all right. "Well, to answer your question. No, I will not join your guild. I was thinking of joining Fairy Tail." "What?" The look on Jose's face twisted in a flash, showing nothing but pure hatred for the said guild. It actually surprised Naruto how the man had quickly changed upon the mention of Fairy Tail. But that didn't stop him from talking. Fairy Tail appears to be the stronger guild. He trailed off when he realized that he probably insulted Jose by saying those words. "That pathetic guild isn't the strongest, Phantom Lord is." Jose snarled, eyes gleaming dangerously at the blonde. He couldn't believe that this man would prefer to join Fairy Tail than his own guild. He couldn't believe that. Fairy Tail of all guilds? He loathed that guild, especially Makarov, with all his heart. Nothing would soothe his corrupted soul than seeing that guild destroyed or disbanded. What would be more pleasing as if he destroyed it with his own hands? Doesn't matter. Naruto shrugged indifferently, even when he knew that it would only serve to infuriate the master further. "I refuse to work for a man who makes me uneasy in the gut." "I see," Jose said, a bit more calmly. "It can't be helped then." He smiled a bit wickedly. "I will have to force the issue. The only reason the Magic Council hasn't come after you is because you haven't been involved in any confrontation with any legal guild. Say I were to say you attacked me, and actually prove it when the Rune Knights come here, what do you think will happen?" Naruto narrowed his eyes. Blackmail? Everyone feared the Magic Council and no one wanted to piss them off. Indeed, it wouldn't be all merry for him if those people pointed their guns at him. He hadn't even thought that this man would even got that far, and this was a special case since Jose was a member of the 10 Wizard Saints. "I tried asking nicely but you refused," Jose said carelessly. "But you shouldn't see this as a bad thing, after all, I'm doing you a favor." Joining that pathetic guild will only make the Magic Council more cautious, and besides, I have the army to fend off your enemies." Naruto shook his head. Before he stood up, "I will take my chances elsewhere," he said. "If something happens here, it will be my word against yours, and who do you think they will listen to?" Obviously, they would listen to one of them. He couldn't be trusted because he was a man they knew nothing about and a wild card since he belonged to no guild. "Nothing will happen," Naruto said as his teleportation seal marked the floor under his feet. "I will run away, for now. Engaging in a confrontation with you will only make things bad for me given your status, and I'm not quite ready to have the entire Phantom Lord chase after me because of something I could have escaped." Jose didn't get a chance to respond because Naruto disappeared from his office, in a flash of blue. The Phantom Lord Master frowned when he realized he couldn't feel Naruto's presence, and that the magic he used is probably teleportation magic. "Oh well, I tried," he said, returning to the other mask. "I will just crush him along with Makarov when the day does come." Later that night. Hokage Dono, Raikage Dono, Tsuchikage Dono. "What a lovely surprise," Mei said, smiling warmly at the three cages, who were standing within her office, looking at her with masks of disgust. Of course she didn't comment on it, but seeing such looks made her fear for her life. She hid it well under the blanket of a smile though. But her worries weren't quenched the least. Knowing that she had been involved with a man like Naruto, a man whose name was forbidden in all parts of the world. Since his horrible death, they decided to forbid anyone from saying that name anywhere. Uzumaki Naruto no longer existed, and the mention of his name didn't install fears as it did back then when he was alive, but it made many shiver in pure hatred as the memories of all he'd done flash into their mind. If it ever got out that she had been involved with him, it would mean her death. Mei knew it for sure. Without doubt a great amount of malice and hatred laid upon Naruto despite his death. Even though his name had become a taboo to mention, many cursed the name of the man who had turned from a good-natured boy into a cold-hearted servant of hell. No, he had become the master of hell. Someone of his power couldn't be a mere servant. "I wasn't expecting to see you three in my presence," Mei said, keeping a warm facade to hide the lurking thoughts running rampant at the back of her head. "If you had told me that you were coming, I would have prepared a more kind welcome for you. Agent matters came up that needed to be dealt with," I responded in a cold tone that did nothing but confirm to the Godem Mizukage that something was indeed going on, and it was a matter of time before she knew.
"I can understand that, but a message would have reached me before you arrived," Mei argued, seeing that she was in trouble, if the looks the cages were giving her were to mean anything.
Her heart was already running a marathon, and thoughts going wild. "Let me put this in a way you can understand it perfectly," Kuratsuchi put out in an icy tone. "We weren't sure you'd be in the village if we told you we were coming. We didn't want to take any chances, hence our arrival in this manner." It really puzzled Mei sometimes when she tried to understand the relationship between Konoha, Iwa and Kumo. The relationship had blossomed in a way that made her question a lot of things. These three hated each other in the beginning, while they didn't like each other that much now. They still plotted together like children of the same father. These three had been the ones to turn her offer down to keep the Allied forces allied. But when it mattered, they were like triplets. "Why would you say something like that?" Mei asked nicely. "Is there something that I do not know? Don't try to act all innocent on us, you filthy whore." Tsunade snarled, glaring at the Mizukage with murderous intent written all over her face. If looks could kill, Mei would have been rolling on the floor fighting for her life. The Godem was giving her the same look she gave Naruto. To say Mei was surprised by Tsunade's outburst was an understatement. She was baffled. This was the woman she'd grown to like since Naruto died, and someone she could at least call a friend. To think that she would turn on her like this. Unbelievable. The Godem Mizukage had never thought that she would hear something like this from this woman. "Excuse me?" she said, more out of her shock than anything. Ai's lightning cloak flashed around him in a second, and before Mei could do anything, the Raikage slammed her into a wall, having crushed her desk to get to her. The force she hit the wall with made the Mizukage wince as pain gripped her tightly. Ai tightened his grip on her neck, pinning her to the wall. "We know what you were doing with that demon, and we will make you pay for it." Struggling to breath, Mei managed to let out a few words. Do why you? UW will get away with this? My Anbu. Don't worry, Mei, Kuratsuchi said with a cruel smirk on her face. The reason we didn't tell we were coming was because we wanted to infiltrate the village first and get our men in before you even realize it. As we speak, this tower is surrounded by our special forces. That explained a lot. Still, Mei didn't think they would go this far over an air, and it wasn't like she was the one who manipulated Naruto into doing what he was doing. She had just been a passenger inside his bus, and her presence probably saved more lives. I'm disappointed in you, Mei. Tsunade shook her. Disgusted is the right word. After everything we did together, you were shagging him behind our backs, while you tell him of our plans. You disgust me. Were you also screwing Gaara? He refused to take part in all these. How pathetic have you become, Tsunade? Do you even hear yourself when you speak? Isn't Gaara your ally? Has Naruto's betrayal broken your mind that much that you'd be willing to be that delusional? Don't you dare. Tsunade flashed towards the pinned red-head woman and smashed her punch straight into her gut with so much force that Mei tore through the wall. Say that name in my presence. The next scene was Mei tied to a cross, a blaze of inferno just away from her. She was surrounded by the three cages and their special forces. If we did this in Kiri while your people watch, they would turn on us. But here, no one will interrupt as we give you a fitting death for conspiring with that thing. Do you have any last words? Mei did nothing but smile as her cross was picked up to be thrown into the blazing inferno. Naruto's eyes snapped open, awakening from the ungodly nightmare. While it was just a dream, there was a possibility that something like that could happen if the truth ever got out. Nothing really stayed hidden forever in the shinobi world. If something like that does happen, it would be his fault for involving her or leaving her in that wretched world. If I wasn't a leader for my people, I would gladly die with you, Mei had told him back then. She was a Kage, and after all she went through to become Kage, he couldn't ask her to follow him to the underworld of the dead. Besides, his soul had been destined for hell, and being the kind person as she was, heaven would have been her new home. And she would suffer because of him, if their relationship ever got out of the closet. Naruto stood up and looked around. He was in the middle of a forest, and it was night. There were days he preferred sleeping in the wilderness, and there were days he wanted to seal the part of his mind that makes him dream, or even curse the god who made him see such things. This only made Wish desire to finish things quickly and return home. The fact that he couldn't take a peek at his world and the possibility of Mei's suffering because of him really infuriated him. If those ungrateful heathens touch her, after everything he did for them, after all the pain he carried on his shoulders, he would be beyond pissed, and those people would know the fury of a god. Powerful gusts of wind began to tear the trees that surrounded him, while tornadoes began to roar in the deathly silent night. This did nothing but cause violent winds that were powerful enough to uproot trees, while Naruto did nothing but stand still in the middle of it all. The tornadoes began to raise high above the sky, where dark clouds were now gathering. Once gathered, the drums of heaven began to hit with tremendous force that nearly made the earth shook. Violent thunderstorms began to light up, hitting the ground warped by violent storms. Naruto just stood in the midst of a violent storm that was now tearing the very ground he stood in. Magic Council HQ. It appeared that Naruto was indeed a person who piqued her curiosity in a great deal. For Ultear to say that she had failed to achieve her objective was a curse to the gods. She never failed and she didn't hope to fail, ever. While she may not have gained what she'd gone for when she was going to see Naruto, she had gained something even more valuable. Just being close to him, the expression he carried, the aura of confidence he covered himself upon and the beating he'd given to Zankro only made her interested in his person by miles than she'd first been. Beating Zankro only proved that he was strong, and if his abilities were to go by anything, she would give it the benefit of the doubt. That man wasn't a weak-minded fool who was provoking trouble from dark guilds. He was more than that, he was a smart and capable mage. His sanity and whether he was capable of standing the might of the dark guilds when they retaliate was another matter altogether. Still, Ultear hadn't thought that he would beat Zankro by that margin. This was someone who hadn't faced defeat in the hands of enemies. Yet Naruto beat him up to the inch of his life and left the battleground unharmed. Naturally, she kept the details about his fighting capabilities to herself, then informing the Magic Council as doing it in this manner gave her more time to work on something while she kept a close eye on that man. Still, being here is rather boring as I can't get any work done, Ultear thought mildly, leaning against the comfort of her chair within the Magic Council HQ at Fury. She didn't get the chance to do any work in here as there were eyes always watching everything, and she preferred to keep her private work private. The council member facade was needed while she was still busy using Jellal. Sighing once more, Ultear stared at her empty desk. Sometimes she wondered why she even bothered to show up here because she really didn't do anything as Seagrain preferred doing much because he was her boss. Ultear never found the amusing part of it whenever she thought of it. The man was her puppet, but he didn't know, he thought she was the puppet. The thought did nothing but to feed her rather sizable ego. The thought was never completed. A stranger flashed into existence on her right side, sitting on the desk, facing her. Ultear nearly freaked out at the sudden appearance. She was shocked, and the only thing that stopped her from falling off her chair was the fact that it was him. Her shock at his appearance had been noticed by him, she just quickly got over it with such speed that his brow furrowed at the quick recovery. Ultear calmed her mind as she tried to think how it was possible for this man to get into her office like this, mind you. This was the tower of the Magic Council, a council that was breathing down on his neck for his actions within the magic world. It was really a bold move on his part. There was no doubt that if he was caught in here, they would take the chance to question him on a few things and he wouldn't be allowed leave without acceptable answers. Those people would surely lock him up if he refused to answer to them. From what she had seen from him during their encounter, he wasn't stupid. She wasn't sure how smart he was, but one thing was certain, he wasn't a stupid person. So, what could possess him to drive him to this place? Did he have some sort of a death wish? Did he know something? Or was there something that he wanted from her? Before that, how was he even able to get into her office? There was no alarm going on to say that there was an intruder. So, how was he able to infiltrate this place without being caught? Ultear shook her head inwardly, dismissing an idea. From the way he appeared, he hadn't walked into the office, he appeared from thin air, just like that. How could that be? The only way to appear like that would be through teleportation, but she didn't think he could do that. Yet, the glaring reality stood before her menacingly. It was a bit amusing to see the woman struggle so hard to explain his appearance. He knew well enough that she would be surprised to see him in her office, a place that she wasn't expecting to see him. More to it when they had no connections whatsoever and his current position didn't make things any better for her. He didn't mind her troubling her mind to search for answers, as he found it to be amusing. "You recovered quickly than I had anticipated," Naruto said to Ultear, keeping the amused look on his face. Her shock had been predictable. His tone was friendly, no hostile intentions. Of course that could all be a mask. She interpreted nothing of it in favor of keeping true to what she believes and her gut. "How?" "A possible answer has already formed within your mind, so what guess did you make?" Naruto asked, trying to keep the woman guessing. A subtle frown settled on Ultear's face for a few moments before she made a guess. "Teleportation?" Naruto nodded his head. "Yay," he said. "So what is the next question, why?" The frown really became visible as Ultear didn't like this kind of game Naruto was playing with her. He knew the answers and would probably tell her without many restrictions, but chose to mess with her head. She really disliked dancing on someone's music. But, if she doesn't play it right, he wouldn't even tell her anything and would probably leave. Ultear bit her lip and swallowed hard before speaking. Or at least she wanted to, but a thought came to her mind before she could recite the same question he'd set up for her. "What do you want from me?" "Assuming that you know that I'm a member of the Magic Council, you must have a reason for being here. Assuming that the others are not aware of your coincidental appearance before me, I would like to know if the show I put up for you was acceptable. What makes you think that my appearance before you was coincidental? You already know that the Magic Council is trying by all means to keep an eye on your movements around Fury. Don't you think they'd send someone like me to observe you up close since normal subordinates aren't doing it at all?" Naruto appeared to be thoughtful for a few moments before he shrugged. "Yes, that may be true, but..." He didn't have to put any words after the "but." The blonde then stood up from the desk and started to look around the office. Aside from the bookshelf, nothing else interested him. He went straight towards the bookshelf, but didn't take any book. He just looked through the titles before turning his attention towards Ultear. "What can I do for you?" Ultear asked, keeping a straight face. He had to have a reason for coming here, and she was curious on his business with her. Naruto smiled, before walking towards the chair in front of the desk. He settled down. "You have a lovely space around here. The air is quite refreshing and it's rather peaceful." "Well, it is the HQ of the Magic Council, nothing less should be expected," he said, not getting to the point which didn't please Ultear. "Considering that intruders are not welcomed in here, you have less time before me. I would use my time wisely if I were you. You can never know if someone will just budge into my office without knocking, and I imagine that wouldn't be good for you," Ultear said, not wanting to say it aloud that if he didn't state his business, she would do something that would get him discovered. But she was sure he would get the point. "Relax, Ultear-san," Naruto said with a smile, raising his index finger. "There are no surveillance lacrimas in here, and my presence can't be sensed by anyone aside from you, and should anyone budge in, I can simply disappear in the way I came." He gave the woman a new kind of smile that didn't make her feel easy at all when she realized the hidden meaning underneath those words and the smile. Disappearing the way he came would only free him from being captured, but since a person would have budged in, it is likely that his presence would be seen. The matter would be upon her if it happens like that, as she would have to answer why she was having someone like him in her office. There was no evidence of a struggle for her to say she couldn't hold him. The likely assumption would be that she was having some dealings with him while he roams around the country. Ultear frowned visibly. She was dealing with someone who knew how to play the game. "What do you want?" She suppressed the anger she felt because of being put in such a situation like this. Even though her word counted more than his, Those people wouldn't make her life easy if they saw her with him, sitting like this. Don't you want to know how I got here so that you can prevent such a thing? If you don't ask, you won't know and I will just appear again. Well, a lot more careful next time since I might find a trap laid out for me. The words left his mouth casually as if he was talking about the warm weather outside. I highly doubt you would tell me. That would be giving away a secret behind his ability and she didn't think he would be stupid enough to reveal that to her so easily. Naruto merely smiled before proving the woman wrong, like I said. I came here via teleportation. That day when you were watching me, I made sure to tag you when I caught you while we were falling. I knew there was a reason you were watching me, so I tagged you just in case. I was surprised to learn that a member of the Magical Council was following me. What do you mean tag? Ultear had known all along that the tree branch hadn't broken because of their weight, but something had made it break. I put my mark on you. With the mark, I can find you anywhere you go, at any time. Wherever you're, whenever, I can always appear before you like I did a few moments ago. Ultear was silent for a few moments before busting out laughing. She laughed for a few moments before calming down. You surprise me, but that didn't mean that she couldn't rid of the mark on her. Her power was absolute and since the mark was obviously on her body, she could remove it before he finds her in a place she shouldn't be. I'm glad, Naruto said with a smile. I have a problem, he started. My record with the Magic Council isn't a good one and I was told by someone that if I was to be involved in an alteration with a legal guild, I was going to be apprehended. That is true, Ultear said. The only reason you're allowed to roam free is because you were focused on removing dark guilds rather than cause problems for the public and legal guilds. I don't want to be put in a prison cell, but it will happen since I'm likely to get involved in a fight with Phantom Lord, Naruto said. What do you want from me? I'm looking for an ally, or at least someone who can warn me so that I can disappear when the Magic Council does choose to come after me. I can go off the grid until matters are solved. And you want me to do that for you? Ultear took a more serious look. What makes you think I will help you? I can simply report you or press the alarm button after you leave and have the Rune Knights after you for breaking into the Magic Council HQ. That is an option, but let us not do something like that, Naruto said. I understand that you can even say I was attempting to assassinate you because I know the Magic Council was after me, and removing all members of the council would be removing the problem. But let us not go that far. Why didn't I think of that? They would have believed her if she put on a convincing act and Naruto would be in great danger as the council wouldn't waste any expenditure in hunting him down for attempting to kill a member of the council. Given all that he's been doing, they wouldn't even give him a fair trial. Then, could she sneak past his defenses and make him her tool? I will only help you out because what I think you're doing something good. Ultear put on a good mask. Whether Naruto believed it or not remained to be seen. However, I will not pull you out of any trouble. I will only help you out on one condition. Fairy tale. Many unexpected things do occur in this world of wizardry, but there were things that Mira Jane would never occur in her entire life. Everyone had a limit in the set of expectations and hopes. No one hoped for everything, and no one expected everything. Naruto's appearance in the guild had shocked her to her core. It wasn't his appearance that shocked her, to be precise. What shocked her were the words he had spoken to her. In all her life, and since that incident occurred, Mira Jane had never thought that someone would come out of nowhere and say such words as though he knew her story. Losing Lisana wasn't the easiest thing, and it had broken her really bad. Elfman had also been hurt by the incident, especially since he was the one who killed her. She'd talked to Elfman about Naruto's proposal, and he didn't seem to be too thrilled about it, but to be honest with herself, She didn't want Elfman attempting a full takeover as he couldn't control the power. When he went out of control, there was always something that happens, and she didn't want to go through the same ordeal that cost her Lisanna, not now and not ever. If there was something available to help her brother, then she would be willing to take up the offer. Still, she didn't understand why that person would wish to do something like that for her brother, especially when he didn't know anything about them. He only came across them after Elfman had lost control, again. But the meeting was brief, and nothing much was exchanged as he had fled from the scene as if he was on a hurry to meet an appointment. Mira suspected that he'd left because he had sensed her allies rushing over to their location. He most likely didn't want to deal with a crowd of people. Surely, there would have been questions asked, and to avoid that he had to hit the road before they arrived. A more troubling thought was that she didn't know much about him in a more personal level or that much about his person in general. When he came to the guild, he looked like a pleasant somebody who had no hidden agenda. She'd looked at it carefully, and he truly didn't seem like he had some motive behind his offer. Still, the fact that he was a stranger didn't ease her worries. She hoped to see him soon and talk more with him. Mira's train of thought came to a halt when Makarov returned to his office. She'd been busy with her thoughts while in the comfort of her master's office. Unlike the hall, this place was a lot quieter and gave her the kind of atmosphere she needed to think and clear her mind. She was only able to do this because the hall was almost empty today, with members out on jobs, while others are just strolling around the town of Magnolia. Since Makarov hadn't been inside his office, it was the perfect opportunity she'd been presented with. The old man had only said he was going to see a friend, and she guessed it must have been Ujima. If he had gone to that woman or a meeting with the other wizard saints, she would have known about it and he would have told her plainly. You returned sooner than expected. Makarov shrugged and took a seat in front of his desk. I didn't stay for too long where I'd gone to, he said. Even though he hadn't told her, Makarov had gone to see Ujima to get more information he could find about the blonde mage who'd visited his guild. The rumor said he was an evil man who destroyed everything on his path, but what he saw wasn't an evil person, and someone who went around destroying dark guilds. Makarov actually saw a nice person. He may be old, but he wasn't blind and stupid. True, appearances could be deceiving, but you had to be more than 100 years to be able to deceive his eyes. Mira nodded quietly. Everything went well, I hope. Yes, Makarov added a nod to affirm his response. Is this about that man? He asked, knowing that she had been thinking, granted her presence inside his office while he was absent. Yes, Mira said. His name is Naruto. You already know this. Some time ago he appeared at the capital and begun working there at a bar. During that time, he displayed no sign of being a wizard and he spent most of his daytime at a library. It is where he met Hisui Fiori, the Princess of Fiori. He befriended her and in time, they became study partners. It is unknown what they studied. A few months ago, he left the capital for unknown reasons and went on a journey that sees him now inside your magazine. I imagine the editors only put in a drawn image of him because they've yet to see him and he acts actually different from what you normally expect and he stays away from the public eye. Since he left the capital, he's been destroying dark guilds all over the country. Naturally, when the Magic Council caught wind of this, they started keeping a close eye on him, but didn't take any action against him. The 10 wizard saints were given a clear description of him and told to be on the lookout for him. The only problem there was is that nobody actually knows anything about his past. Everything known about him stretches to 2 years at most. Mira Jane was silent for a few moments as she absorbed everything that Makarov had told her. She assumed the Phantom was him since they didn't actually know his name despite him giving it to some people. Possibly it was because those he gave his name met him outside the work environment. Given how nice he acts, you wouldn't suspect a thing. He wouldn't go dropping his names to dark guilds, so it was understandable why those people wouldn't know it. Still, it was just Naruto, no family name. It was a scary fact realizing that he was just shrouded with one big mystery, but that only made Mira Jane curious about him. Surely that happy facade couldn't have been a mask, could it? Is he a part of any guild? It would be understandable if he was part of another guild and was only doing jobs for his guild or just filling on job requests. Makarov shook his head. He isn't part of any legal guild or dark guild. So far, he works alone. He still found it hard to believe though. What could be going on his mind to actually go after dark guilds on his own? There were crazy strong people in the dark world, and it wasn't a place to venture alone, yet he was doing it anyway. Now that was a surprise, even to Mira Jane. He must be either stupid or arrogant. He paused as a thought came to mind. If no one actually knows anything tangible about him, then it is a possibility that he is aligned to a guild. Makarov didn't deny it. That isn't out of the cards, he said. What do you think of him, from your 2 meetings with him? He seems nice. That was all she could say about him. She didn't know anything about the whole phantom thing, but she had seen a nice person before her. If it was someone saying that he actually trounced on the dark world, she wouldn't believe it since he seemed like one of the light. Makarov nodded. He seems that way to me, he said. Laxus had a run-in with him about 2 months ago. Laxus knew nothing of him, probably still knows nothing. But he did say that he was very strong, and was able to hold his own against him. According to Laxus, that fool seemed to enjoy their fight too much that he didn't even take it seriously. Still, he was never able to fight seriously or ended as he disappeared with these words. Oh, will you look at the time? My next appointment is coming up soon and I must leave. Well, it has been fun, Lax-chan. Mira Jane didn't need to assume or guess anything. Laxus had been obviously annoyed and irritated by the nickname and the sudden disappearance. I'd already presumed that he was strong. He did, after all, take out a transformed elfman with a single spell without even making it look too hard. And he used lightning, just as Laxus does. Makarov nodded. For now, let us just wait and see what he wants when he returns. He did say he would return. Perhaps then they would learn much about him, but he highly doubted it though. Aika's house. Zankro was still crying out for blood, and had made Naruto his #1 enemy. Well, it wasn't anything unexpected. The man had never been defeated before, and for him to face such a humiliation in the hands of someone unknown is beyond what is acceptable. Even Ultear hadn't thought that the battle would end up like that. But she wasn't disappointed, nevertheless. Hades had simply put the matter at hand while he focused on his goals, but she knew he would turn on to the blonde again, only when the time is right. Naruto was such an interesting person. It wasn't Zankro who hated him, she was beginning to dislike him. He knew when to speak and when not to. He didn't make bargains he could deal with and didn't enter into a ring without expecting the unexpected in a dictionary to define all words that troubled him. Negotiating with him wasn't easy, especially when he didn't agree to anything that would put him at a disadvantage. Still, she may be beginning to dislike him for his mind. She liked what he brought and wouldn't stop at anything to get him to play in her board. He was a man, and it would only be a matter of time before she bedded him. Everyone has her own weakness, after all. The hard task was finding it, and then you could think of many ways to exploit it. Ultear smiled unpleasantly as she looked at the huge mansion that housed the woman who was within her reach and close to Naruto. Aside from Hisui, there was no one other than this woman who had some personal relationship with him. She could leverage something and perhaps find something to use against that man when he does choose to show his face before her, again. The princess was a little of a high league, but this unprotected jewelry was for her to steal. Naruto should know that you don't deal with the devil and leave your house open like this. She could do everything she wanted with this woman. She could even hold her ransom and demand Naruto do anything for her if he wishes for the woman to be safe. She was bold into coming here because she knew that the blonde wasn't anywhere close to this mansion. Ultear walked in through the entrance like a normal person, instead of just sneaking through. It was also the safe way to enter since she didn't know what kinds of traps were laid upon the mansion. It would be embarrassing and would lead to her downfall if she is caught while trying to sneak inside. That man would definitely use the advantage and she didn't want him holding a knife on her back, she wanted to be the one holding it. The servants were all too nice and led her to the master of the house who was at the library, packing books. Ultear had noticed that as she walked through the passages of the mansion, there were a lot of boxes around with stuff being packed and others being unpacked. According to her intel, the mansion had just changed ownership and presumably, Naruto had something to do with it since bad people lived here until recently. Hello. Ultear greeted with a small smile. She played with her eyes as if she was looking around. Recently moved in? Aika nodded with a bright smile. My parents used to own this house until it was taken by some people. I only bought it back recently and I want to give it a look that will suit my standards. Can you manage to breathe without troubles in such a huge place? I didn't see anyone who seemed like family other than servants while coming here. Ultear continued with the small talk before she could introduce herself. I will, Aika said. She had lived here before, and there weren't many people back then. The only difference now would be that she was all grown up and her parents weren't around. Ultear nodded, and took a few steps towards Aika. She held out her right hand before introducing herself. I am a friend of Naruto's, and I am called. She was cut off by Aika. Ultear, the other woman said, making Ultear frown. Naruto said you'd come at this place to help me pack and sort things out. I'm surprised you came as he said he wasn't sure you'd come. Ultear's frown deepened, and her expression twisted for a second. She wasn't happy. That bastard had predicted she would come here and had prepared for it. He knew very well that going to see her would incite her to make a move on someone who knew him. His presence had been calculated, and this showed that he was much more manipulative than he appeared. Still, what could stop her from killing this woman? It wouldn't take a second for her to do it. There wasn't anyone who could stop her. If she kidnapped this woman, Naruto would know that it was her, but what would that change? He obviously didn't put any protection to protect this woman. So even if he predicated her presence, nothing was holding her back from doing what she pleased. In the end, she couldn't do it. There were many possibilities that Ultear thought, many options she thought of taking while staring at that blind woman, but in the end, she'd swallowed a large chunk of her pride and ego, and forced a smile that hid the fury behind the mask. She had smiled at the woman and did something she found to be detestable. Listening to that woman brag about how much of a lovely person Naruto was did nothing but fuel her desire to see that man suffer for the embarrassment she'd faced. Ultear was a proud woman. She refused to bow to anyone but herself. Yes, she did sulk up to Hades, but that was all just a part she was playing. Grimoire Heart was just another stage she played many of her parts in the storyline she'd composed for herself. But there were things that were starting to frustrate her plans. To be more precise, someone was becoming a major problem to her. And she still knew little about him. Not even that woman knew his history. She could only tell of the present, but there was nothing tangible for her to use, nothing concrete for her to cling onto as her gold. Still, This was just the beginning and things were little interesting in this way. But for everything, she was going to find his weakness, use it against him, and make him her pawn. She would use him. Chew him until there was nothing left of him. Then she would dispose of the trash and move on to other things. Ultear wasn't to be outsmarted, not now, not ever, and certainly not by that man. A knock on the door snapped Ultear of her daze. "Come in," she said, sitting behind her desk inside the Magic Council's tower within Fury. "The meeting is about to begin, Ultear-sama." Ultear sighed. A meeting of the Magic Council. The meetings were often tiresome, and some were amusing. But dealing with stubborn old people without any real power to speak of wasn't that easy, especially when they didn't listen to youngsters that well. They believed they were more equipped and wise enough to deal with anything because of their many years of living and the experience they have accumulated in their lifetimes. But age wasn't everything, especially in this time. "I'll be right there," Ultear said, sighing once more. She took her time before her feet dragged her body towards the meeting room. The passages were rather silent as she walked by. Perhaps it was all in her mind. Perhaps it was because her mind was wrapped up in her little dream world because of the worrying situation that she found herself in. Ultear finally made it at the room. The others were all but waiting for her to make her appearance. "We've been waiting for you." Ultear didn't bother to respond as it was dead obvious that they'd been waiting for her to make her awaited appearance. "Let us just get on with the meeting," Sigrian said. He didn't have a clue as to what the business of the day was. He didn't know of any other impending situation that may need for them to be called to this place, at this time. All eyes turned to the chairman who seemed to be in thought. Getting over his thought, the chairman started speaking. "I called you because of a thought I've come up with," he added. "It is obvious that our people are not getting the desired information about this phantom. In light of this, I've come up with a better way to get the results we require. We recruit him to work for us. That way, we can keep a close eye on him." Well, that was unexpected, Ultear thought. This would give her an excuse to be seen with Naruto, but at the same time, it would give that bastard all the reasons to appear before her all he liked. Another bright idea said is that she could keep a very close eye on his activities as well as boss him around a bit. Since he was going to be working for the Magic Council, and she was part of the council, it ultimately meant that she would be his superior. What an unexpected turn of things. I understand the merits of recruiting, but should we really trust someone like him? We know nothing about him. Isn't it that we're trying to get as much as information we can from him while he is close to us, hence the thought of recruiting him? Ultear said, revealing nothing of what she was really thinking. If he is recruited, we will be able to monitor him without the current limits, and we also be able to use him for the good of the magic world. Who knows, we might even convert him. That last part was definitely her own agenda. Unknown location. Naruto's movements suddenly slowed down and he jumped down to the ground from the trees he was hopping. Someone was following him and it had been like that for some time now and it was now starting to get to him. He hadn't tried hiding his presence nor increasing his speed to get away from the person. He had kept going like he had been so that the person could be finally brave enough to reach him and speak her business. He had already discovered that the person was not going to attack, so there was no need to be alarmed. The blonde landed gracefully and turned around. He waited for a few moments while the silent forest hit him with a cool breeze that washed over his senses without violating anything. After a few moments, a man, wearing dodgy black clothes, landed on the ground. He seemed rather tired from running after him. Naruto could identify the man as an Anbu if he was speaking in the terms of his former world. The only piece he was able to recognize was the upper cloth, which had the symbol of the king's guards. He had once dealt with the chief of the royal guard, so he would know. Besides, he'd spent enough time at the capital to tell things apart. What is a member of the royal guard doing here, away from the capital? The man didn't correct Naruto as he was half wrong and half right. Yes, he was from the capital, but not exactly part of the royal guard. There was no need for Naruto to know all that, so he didn't say anything. I have a message from His Majesty. Naruto's eyes narrowed a bit, but he said nothing. He wishes to speak to the man who has been close to the princess. A call from the king isn't actually a request, isn't it? Naruto asked. He knew the answer to his question. When a king called you, you had to go because he wasn't requesting for your presence but actually summoning you. If one knew what was better, he would quickly follow along the summons. Still, if you had the power to stand up to anyone or anything like he could, he didn't have to bow to anyone because of their authority. But because he had a relationship with the man's daughter, he had to go. If it wasn't for Hisui or the fact that he was interested in hearing what the King of Fury wanted to say to him, he would have definitely said no to the summons, even if it was coming from a king. Lead the way. Instead of just teleporting straight to the capital, Naruto chose to allow himself to be led by the messenger. It wouldn't do any good if he chose to teleport and leave the man behind, and besides, he didn't have that much of a twisted sense humor to watch the man return to the capital looking all tired because he had to hurry back as he'd left him behind. You're a very hard man to track, Uzumaki-san, the man with Naruto suddenly said as the two made their way towards the carriage he'd left behind. Somewhere. He wasn't exactly sure since he'd moved about a lot quickly to cover ground with Naruto's movements. You have me in your sight, so I can't be that difficult to find, Naruto said smiling, but inside his attention was surely focused on the man. Nobody actually called him Uzumaki in this world. Hisui knew his family name because he'd told her, so it wasn't much of surprise that people from the royal family would know, but to actually call him by it was another matter. Actually, I've been looking for you since your last visit to the capital, Turaga said a bit firmly. Naruto arched a curious brow. That had been about a month ago, and so far, he wasn't doing anything to hide his presence nor teleporting that much. Anyone with enough skills could have tracked him down if they so wished. The main reason he'd done this was because he wanted to see which of the main top dogs in the dark guilds would be coming after him. It wouldn't do any good to his conscience if he brought trouble to Fairy Tail, but so far, he was both disappointed and relieved that no one was following him from the dark circle. Why didn't you come to me while I was still inside the royal castle? He had spent some time with Hisui during his day visit to her, and there were many opportunities that represented themselves for someone to make contact with him. Hisui wasn't watching his every move after all. His Majesty thought it best to speak to you when you thinking of leaving, and I'd time my schedule to talk to you outside the royal castle, but you just disappeared. I only got help from Her Highness, and set out on a journey to find you. A day later. The capital city of Fury, Naruto never quite got enough of it. The place was just unlike anything in the elemental nations. The Fire Lord didn't have a place as this big despite controlling the strongest country. There were many rich kings in other nations, outside of the shinobi world, but none were placed like this. Naruto was also coming back to this place a lot more than he'd thought when he first left. He didn't have much to complain about though. His role in this world was to root out evil that another man had so ignored, and only realized on a later stage what he should have done, but by that time, the world was already a mess. If that man had acted, things may have been a bit different. But this wasn't the time of buts and ifs. He had a role to play, and to be able to have an influence in a world like this, he needed to take advantage of everything, even friendship to the king. Who knows? It might bring him more good than harm. Do you wish to see Her Highness, or should we head straight to the king? Naruto shook his head. Hisui could wait, and besides, he hadn't come here to speak to her, he'd come here because he was called by her father. As soon as he finished business with the king, he was going to leave the royal castle so that he could go and deal with other matters. I will see the princess some other time, he said. Turaga actually turned to face the blonde, but merely shook his head. As you wish. Naruto didn't feel like questioning the look he was given by the man. Instead, he just followed him silently as they made their way towards the king's residence. As they walked past the corridors of the castle, Naruto realized that the place was a lot bigger than he'd first thought. Even though he ventured about with Hisui, he'd never walked quite this long inside the castle. Not too long, the man he was walking with requested him to stand still after they'd reached large double doors. Naruto assumed that this was where the king was stationed. It was a bit curious since he wasn't exactly like living in under the same house as his daughter. However, given all the things that Hisui does, and the responsibility the king has, it shouldn't really surprise him. He wouldn't be surprised if their relationship isn't that well like father and daughter. The doors suddenly opened, and Naruto was led inside the king's quarters. He felt that something really big must be happening for a commoner like him to be welcomed into the quarters of the king. This was the personal space of His Royal Majesty, not just any place, and only those trusted ever came into this place. The mischievous part of him grinned at the thought of playing a little inside the king's court, but his more rational self quickly shut down the thought. Naruto was led towards a room, splashed with a large table and chairs with all kinds of food decorating it. Naruto wasn't that much of a eater to be drooling over the admittedly mouth-watering food, at least it appeared that way. Your Majesty, I came quickly as I could when I received your summons. That was obviously a lie. But who cared? I must say, I am honored that His Majesty would find it fit for a nobody like me to appear before him. Kurama would probably be rolling in laughter right about now. Ever since he gained godly power, Naruto had never bowed his head before anyone. He refused to do so, not even before Hagoromo, not even before the so-called nine-tailed demon fox. He was doing nothing more the part. It was necessary. He knows the type of man the king was, and he was sure as hell not going to be a puppet to anyone. The part was needed. The more kind part of him wouldn't agree to this kind of method, but the godly, mischievous part of him would certainly agree. The King of Fury noted that Naruto called his message a summons, and despite lowering himself to appear more humble, he still left an aura around him that spoke other volumes. I am glad you could take your time to come here, Naruto. He sounded way too familiar than he should be, considering that this is their first meeting. Or do you prefer to be called Phantom? The small figure of a king added, smiling. Naruto is just fine, Naruto said, putting a smile of his own. If I may, what is it that His Majesty summoned me here for? Please take a seat and fill your stomach. Food is available, the king said. We'll talk after you've eaten. Though not that hungry, Naruto helped himself. A few minutes passed as Naruto ate in silence. He didn't bother to look at the king every now and then, but he knew that the man had his eyes on him the whole time. It was at such moments that ignorance was truly bliss. Fairy tale. It was finally happening. After 2 weeks of wandering around the country of Fury, looking for nowhere, going nowhere, but just taking a stroll around the country, Naruto had finally decided to return to Magnolia, for the joining of Fairy Tail. There had been so much in his mind that he needed to cleared, but he couldn't do it just sitting around at one place, hence the stroll. It was refreshing seeing new sights and new people as it brought upon new kind of thoughts as well give him an opportunity to escape from the dream that drenched him in cold fury. He didn't want anything happening to Mei because of his own actions. He didn't want to think that his desire, his dream and all the sacrifices he'd made had been in vain. It would be total loss to know and find out that he'd suffered for nothing, to realize that he'd caused so many people pain for nothing. The shinobi world had received much sacrifices from him. He didn't think he would do any more sacrifices to do more. He would even possibly curse anyone who dares violated what he sought to build. It was these kinds of thoughts that had him wondering about the country, trying to clear everything so that he didn't go to Fairy Tail in a bad mood. Things wouldn't be well if he went to the guild feeling out of it. A calm mind was needed to keep the mask on. He didn't want to show anyone things that he kept hidden because he couldn't control the troubling thoughts inside of him. He was playing a dangerous game, thus he needed to be in guard in almost everything he did, or he would end up making a mess of himself and those around him. He was doing this, joining another home of warriors, fighters. If it had been the shinobi world, this would be like joining another shinobi village. Though, that probably wouldn't happen in his lifetime. He would have rather be a wandering shinobi rather than join another village. Perhaps creating his own village was an option he would do, but joining an existing village was a no-no. There wouldn't be any feelings of betrayal towards Konoha. The village had done nothing than curse his existence from the day he was born after all. Oh, better get this done with, Naruto said to himself. He was being all emotional about the whole matter, and it was somewhat embarrassing to his title as the demon god. Well, he was no longer called that, but the little god voice in him was cringing at the thoughts that had plugged his mind. Are you lost? Gray asked, looking at the back of Naruto. He'd noticed the blonde standing near the entrance of Fairy Tail from a long way back. He didn't see exactly who it was because Naruto was wearing something different from the last time he was here. He was now wearing a long black coat without collars. The coat was reaching just below his ankles, and there was a red flame pattern along the hemline. No, not at all, Naruto responded calmly, turning to his left to face the Ice Maker wizard, who was now standing just beside him. You. A look of recognition passed through Gray. He couldn't forget the face of the man who had come to the guild some time ago. What brings you back to the guild? Naruto smiled. I wish to join Fairy Tail, the blonde responded before walking into the guild, leaving Gray behind. The noisy wizards were still present in the guild. Perhaps it was because it was just past breakfast time. He halted his footsteps to see if there was anyone he may have encountered along the way, but there was no one present, so he went straight to the counter where Mira was standing. Wait up. Gray called, rushing towards him. The blonde didn't stop though, as he knew the black-haired Ice Maker would catch up to him, and it wasn't like he was going to suddenly disappear. What is it? Naruto asked as the Ice Maker had caught up to him before he could reach Mira, all while ignoring the chatters happening around the guild hall. There were certainly a number of mages going about different matters, but Naruto wasn't concerned about them at the moment to pay them any attention. Why would you want to join this guild? It wasn't like he didn't like new people coming to the guild. Makarov never turned anyone down. But he was curious about this one. After the little he has heard, even a bonehead like Natsu would be curious. Or not. Because I like this place, Naruto simply said, again, leaving Gray behind. This time, the Ice Maker didn't follow the blonde. He simply went ahead to sit with the others for another day as a mage of Fairy Tail within the country of Fury. Even though it wasn't the kind of response he wanted, Gray accepted it without questions. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief when he sat down on a stool. He was used to ruckus occurring on his background. He had worked as a barman after all. What happened here last time was nothing compared to what he had to deal with in the capital during the night when he was doing his shifts. There was really nothing more troublesome for a barman to deal with than drunken fools who didn't know their places. Those people said anything and did everything they felt like doing, right or wrong, and that often got to him. The fairies only caused some damage in their joy, but there were no curses been thrown around and vulgar language violating his hearing, as well as all kinds of detestable things being done to women by immoral men. The noise that occurred in here was a noise of happiness and friendship. So, it was acceptable and a nice thing for a change. He certainly couldn't have lived under those previous conditions without blowing someone's head off. After long periods of suffering. Damn, he really does think some nasty thoughts sometimes. Well, he blamed his past life for it. I was thinking you were no longer going to return, Mira said lightly, handing the blonde a jug of orange juice, as it was what he ordered the last time he was here. She didn't forget. I got lost while in the long walk of life, and I had to find my way back, again, Naruto said, smiling. It had been close to a month since he last came here, but he hadn't said he would return soon, he just told her he would eventually return to the guild. There were pressing matters that he had to handle and some thinking needed to be done before his return, hence the longer than expected period taken for his return. It wasn't a typical answer that she had expected to hear from him, nor had she expected him to spill out everything he had been doing over the past weeks, but she wasn't expecting such a response. It was almost weak for an attempt to tell her he didn't want to tell her anything. Well, she hadn't asked anything, so it was all right. Still, the look on his face clearly told her that he wasn't quite invested on trying to hide anything. His response was almost like a shrug. Mira nodded. You weren't bitten by anything while lost, were you? Naruto shook his head, keeping the smile. No, he added, I was careful along the way. See, I'm still in the same condition as I came and even got this. He pointed at the coat which had replaced the cloak he was wearing last time. The coat looks better on you than the cloak, Mira said, smiling. Really, it did. The sleeves were tight against the hands, and it hanged perfectly on his shoulders as well as gave him a more, well, an image that suits what they now call him. The smile he wore really killed any thought of evil though. I know, right? Naruto checked himself a bit. This shop owner said it would look good on me when she sold it to me while I was looking for a sword. He never got the sword from the blacksmith though. The kind of weapon he needed was one made out of the toughest material. But she was able to point to him where he could get the material, and where to get it crafted for him. How have you been, anyway? Good. You? Well, Naruto said. So, are you here for the other matter, or just to see Master? Mira asked, a bit quietly. He had been asked for a talk by her master, but he'd left shortly after that saying he needed to meet another appointment, but had said he would return.
He'd also said he would return for them to finish up the business they started during his visit.
Both, and another matter, actually, Naruto said, holding out 3 of his right fingers. Another matter was joining the guild. Makarov also seemed like he wanted to have a word with him the day he came here. He didn't mind having a conversation with the old man, as long as he wasn't forced to say anything he didn't want to. Well, no one could force him to do anything he didn't want. When it came to moving him, it was an impossible feat. Mira raised a brow in curiosity. Another matter? Naruto's smile brightened. I wish to become a member of the fairy tale family. Isn't a family what they call this guild? As surprised as she was, Mira didn't show much. She was experienced in life better than that. It wasn't every day that you hear a man who was terrorizing dark guilds say he wants to join a guild like Fairy Tail. Naruto wasn't associated with the light world, despite showing to be an enemy of the evil. That is according to popular belief anyway. Makarov had been able to get some information regarding the blonde, and as it turned out, destroying dark guilds wasn't the only thing that he did with his life. In some other parts of the country, he is what many could call a good Samaritan. While he wasn't busy being the enemy of dark guilds and making things disappear, he was helping out those people in need. There were a lot of towns he'd helped, and didn't even accept a pay from the work he did. Normally, anyone would accept the reward, but as one of the mayors questioned had said, he merely said, "Give it those in need of it." It made Mira curious on how he sustained his though. As far as intel suggested, Naruto didn't have any connections with any guild to say that he was being paid for the work he was doing. The fact that he was even here meant that he didn't have anyone. So, if he wasn't getting paid by anyone, and refused to take rewards, where did he get the money to sustain his life? For real? Uncharacteristically, she questioned, looking straight at his eye. Makarov had suspected that when he said he would return to the guild, it may be the case, but he wasn't positive. Nevertheless, he had left a message saying that if he does come, he shouldn't be turned down. He was a nice person after all. Well, at least that is what it looked like despite the dark clouds above him. Yap. Mira settled her thoughts before nodding to herself. She smiled and spoke, "For someone with your reputation you must have had offers to join other guilds, of any kind. If she was interested and was a guild master, she would have made attempts to recruit him to her side. If all the rumors were, well, according to Makarov, most of it was true, then he would be a valuable member to a guild." Of any kind? Naruto repeated Mira's last words with a raised brow. "You mean like from both illegal and dark guilds?" It wasn't stated as a question, just a statement, as there was no single doubt that it was what Mira meant. "Yes, I've had offers, but I turned them down. When people come running after you because of what they've heard, they want something. In my case, any guild that has attempted to recruit me is only after what I can offer. To be more precisely, they just want to use me," the blonde gave his honest response. It was understandable that he would wish to avoid being a tool to anyone. Even she wouldn't like being a tool used to satisfy someone's needs. She was standing where she stood because of a choice, and when she fought for the guild, it wasn't because she had no other choice but because she desired to protect what she loved. Why fairy tale? That was asked out of curiosity more than anything. Though Makarov suspected he may want to join the guild, there was reason given on why he would require to do such a thing. It is a good guild, and I think it is the strongest guild in Fury. I've come across different guilds in my travels, both good and bad, but there's never been a guild quite like Fairy Tail, and what I see in here pleases me. Besides, Mira Jane Strauss has a reputation of being a good person, as of late anyway. Neither does Makarov Dreas have a bad reputation." Naruto explained why he chose Fairy Tail. Those weren't his reasons entirely, but it covered everything. As far as Mira could tell, he was being honest, but she was sure that he didn't tell her everything. Well, she wasn't expecting anything less anyway. "Okay," Mira said. "I will get that fixed in a moment. What of other matters? Is the master of this guild present?" Mira shook her head. "No," she said. "But he should return to later on." "Right." Naruto took a thoughtful pose before nodding to himself. "Since there seems to be no problem with me joining this guild, I will go look for a place and return after lunch to get my membership fixed. Do you need help with that?" As far as she was concerned, he wasn't familiar with the town, so she thought it would only be thoughtful if she asked so to offer help if it was required. "No, I can manage on my own," Naruto said, finishing the last of his juice. Mira nodded. "I can get you registered in no time, if you'd like to get it done before you look for a place to stay." "Let's do that then." He thought the process would take some time, but apparently, it didn't require that much time from him. Naruto's new apartment. Another home. Living on the road was problematic in this manner. He could never have one place to call a home. He was always moving about. That meant he could never really call any place a home, since sooner or later he was going to pass by. Yes, though he called it home, it wasn't home. This was just a cave he'd made for himself just so he could have a place to rest his head after another day of work. He wasn't just roaming around the world without purpose, he had things to do, and it forced upon this kind of lifestyle. But it was alright, it wasn't going to be like this forever. Still, he wasn't planning on staying in this world forever. He had his own home. Even though he should be dead in the timeline of his former home, he still wanted to return, he still wanted to see the events that transpired after his death, he still wanted to see May's smile again. It was only if the situation sickened him to no end that he would choose to return to this world and continue with the rest of his life here, living as a wizard. For now, he had no plans though. It would be most damaging to his mind and sanity if things are not as he hopes. If anything does occur according his nightmares, then he would certainly be infuriated with those people. He may have been all kind and forgiving, but playing demon had certainly left a new mark on him, and that mark always reacted when he was wronged. Its reactions weren't so pleasing to the offenders. In fact, the reactions would certainly be downright murderous. Naruto shook his head, clearing it of such thoughts so that he could focus on the positive side of things. Dwelling on the sad part of things that did nothing but bring out the worst in him, and it wasn't going to help his course. It was only going to corrupt him and sway him out of the line he'd promised to follow. Officially, he was now a member of Fairy Tail, hence the decision to get a place to stay within the town of Magnolia. Since he wasn't that big on things, he didn't lease out a house. He didn't need extra spaces or any other things that one would require. Bedroom, sitting room, bathroom, and a kitchen were all that he needed. And so, he got such a place that offered him all these, and he hadn't been slow in filling the place with furniture. After that, this was what happened. He sat down on the couch staring at the ceiling, reflecting on life while waiting for his guest to arrive. She'd sent him a message saying she wanted to talk to him, and he had sent her what was needed for her to make an appearance into this place. The look on his face wasn't that speaking of joy, but it was a forlorn expression. Ultear was a little surprised to see that he would have them meet in his place, but she didn't comment on it when she found something puzzling. The look on his face. It was the kind of look that she sometimes makes in her moments of vulnerability. What was even puzzling was that he allowed her to see such a look. Their relationship was based on who had the better cards to screw the other. If he allowed her to see such a look, she could narrow her search for his weakness and may actually manage to bypass his usually tight defenses. Don't be surprised, Naruto started, we all have our moments. You may think that the whole world is in your hands, but there is one day that you will realize that it isn't the world in your hands, but your own little world of imagination. He then stood up, that look now gone, replaced by his usual smile. It was gone, like it had never been there. Did her allow her to see that look on purpose? Ultear wondered as he made his way towards her. She got so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't even realize it until it was too late that he'd invaded her personal space. He was dangerously inches away from her face, and his right hand was rested about her waist. It felt perfectly positioned to keep her from moving away from him. Not the one to be flustered or bow to the pressure, Ultear merely smiled despite how uncomfortable she felt since she obviously wasn't in charge of their current position. Just by allowing her to see a glimpse of his vulnerable face, she'd become so excited that she'd forgotten that she was inside his den, his home ground. "What are you doing?" she asked, a little too nicely. "Say, Ultear-san, you're a woman in the Magic Council, don't you get lonely sometimes?" Naruto said in a whisper, strongly pulling the woman closer to him. He added, whispering into her right ear. "Don't you have those moments you just want to satisfy your body? Allow it to be dominated by a strong, capable, and manipulative man? Don't you get those days you just want to ride something like a mad donkey?" Yeah, he wasn't as effective as May. The Mizukage was better with seduction. Aha, I'm not good, he mumbled, turning towards the kitchen without even bothering to look at Ultear's expression. Naturally, this was done on purpose. The woman was rather relieved that he'd done so. After a few moments of gathering herself, she placed her right hand on her right hip and asked, "What if I was going to respond positively?" She said, having heard his mumble. "I'm no good," Naruto said. "I wouldn't bite if you did. I may be all bark, but am quite honestly harmless," the blonde said, smiling. Now facing Ultear. It wasn't actually true, but who cared? "That isn't according to that woman," Ultear said, not changing her posture. "That woman?" Naruto repeated in thought before a look passed through. "You mean Aika? Oh, she says a lot of things about me. Most of them aren't true," he grinned. "Don't tell her, but she doesn't actually know me as much as she thinks she does," he said. Ultear may have frowned at that, but decided against it. "What did she do for you to call her, that woman, anyway?" Nothing at all." "Ho? So she did nothing, but I did everything. If something does happens to her, it will be my fault," Naruto said, reading her underlining tone. "Is it really the time to make threats, Ultear? I mean, we haven't even consummated our relationship. Wouldn't it be better to wait until then?" Ultear chuckled slightly before walking up to Naruto. She leaned closer to him, whispering, "I'm not making threats, Naruto. If I were making threats, you would know it without a doubt, and I assure you, you wouldn't be standing here, smiling like that." Ew. Naruto's smile turned a little goofy. Is this foreplay or are we just talking dirty? That wasn't the kind of reaction Ultear expected from him. In fact, she was so surprised that she made some distance between them and stared him straight into his eyes. "Are you mocking me?" Much to her annoyance, he nodded before continuing with his movements away from her. The nerve of this man. "Please sit down, Ultear," he said, strangely a bit serious. "Would you like something to drink?" Ultear blinked a few times before shaking her head. She sat down because she really needed to and think over everything that has happened ever since she arrived. Naruto has shown her different masks. He could be anything he wanted to be, and that didn't depend on the situation. Aika's life was in serious trouble if he messed up with his dealings, and he not even for once seemed seriously concerned about it. In fact, he had poked fun in the matter, regardless of how serious it was. Didn't he know she wasn't joking? Of course he did, but why react the way he did? Simple. Because he can. The leader of the Seven Kin of Purgatory smiled slightly at the thought. She was beginning to understand how he worked, and this certainly worked for her advantage. She wasn't at total loss. New place? It seemed like it. She wouldn't exactly know since she'd been teleported straight into the apartment. She didn't get a chance to see the outside of the apartment. Naruto nodded as he sat down beside Ultear on her right side. "Magnolia," he started. "I just recently packed everything. So yes, this is a new place for me, at least." He was holding a bottle of water, which he didn't open, but placed it on the small table in front of him. "This means you're finally going to settle in one place." Well, that for once, this made it easy to find him. She hadn't thought he would be settling anytime soon, with all the trouble he's been causing. But she didn't question it. "You didn't say anything about finding a place to settle in our last meeting. If you had, I could have found you a better place." "Well, you didn't ask me, did you?" He then put on a sly smile before adding, "I didn't think that you were so eager to get me into the sack, Ul-chan." Since she didn't feel like it and was kind of interested in how he would react, Ultear snorted, "Keeping dreaming," she said. "I might just," Naruto said. He always has an answer for everything and seems to like having the last word, Ultear thought. But of course, that could all just be a mask hiding the truth. Why Magnolia? Didn't I tell you? As if he had really told her, he put on a surprised look. I have become a fairy tale mage. He sounded like a little boy who'd just been given that sacred toy he so desired with all his heart, and grin on his didn't make Ultear believe otherwise. Here's my guild mark. It was on his left cheek, hidden beneath the hair that framed the sides of his face, and red in color. Whether she was surprised or not, Ultear didn't let it show. Why fairy tale? Out of the guilds he could have joined, he chose that guild? Fairy tale seems a little too nice for someone as not nice as him. People like him didn't become associated with the fools of that guild. So why would he do something like that? Naruto closed his left eye and winked at the purple-haired woman. That's my secret, he said. There was not even a secret to hide, he just liked playing 21 questions with the woman as it was somewhat fun. Ultear frowned for a second before shrugging. I better state my business before I become too comfortable in here, she said purposely. Naruto just looked at her, waiting for her to spill out her business. In the next days, you will get a message from the Magic Council, summoning your presence back at HQ. They wish to hire you so that you can work for them. I see. When it mattered, his expression became blank, depriving her of a chance to tell what he thought about the news. She didn't show her disappointment though. You must be happy. Why do you say so? Well, I will get to disclose some information about myself to the council, and I can't just run away as I have now become a mage of fairy tale. Moreover, since you're a member of the council, you can get me to do whatever you like, business or personal. I would have no option but to do as you request. The Magic Council isn't going to ask for me to work for it, isn't it? They are going to tell me. Don't be down about it, perhaps it might not be so bad, Ultear said smiling. And I wouldn't think of making you do anything you don't like. That was an obvious lie. Both knew it, but still chose to act like it was nothing. Really? Well, that is a relief. Naruto trailed off when he heard a knock on the door. Who could it be? Are you expecting anyone? Ultear asked. If he was, she could take her leave. But home was pretty far away while in this place. She would have had to leave in the same way as she came. Not that I can think of, but I don't think we have any more business since you've said what you wish to say, Naruto said standing up, so that he could open the door. You're free to leave. I've got to return to the guild anyway. Ultear stared at Naruto for a few moments. She knew he said it on purpose, knowing that she would need his help to leave. If he was waiting for her to ask for the help to return to HQ, he had another thing waiting for him. She could make arrangements to get back without sucking up to him. Ultear wasn't going to step that low. Oh, I forgot, Naruto said smiling, seemingly amused, probably by what he assumed was going inside her mind. Some other time then, he said, holding out a single-hand seal. The magical seal appeared under her, ready to erase her existence in Naruto's apartment. You should teach me how to do this, Ultear said. It will simplify things. She was gone after that. Naruto rolled his eyes. Yay, right, he thought, going towards the door. He was beginning to like her presence though. Still, times with that woman were truly draining. If he made one little mistake she could capitalize on, he was a dead man. By the way things were playing out, he wouldn't be surprised if she thought of doing all sorts of horrible things to him. He was playing with fire, but banked on the gallons of cold water he had saved up to keep him from being burned. Mira, it was the white-haired S-ranked wizard outside his door. He'd forgotten that she'd requested his address when he returned to the guild to check for Makarov, but he didn't think she would be here so quickly. come in. I'm not here to stay, Mira said, shaking her head. I just came to inform you that Master has returned and wishes to speak to you. When the blonde came to the guild, Makarov had been away, but since they'd expected him to turn up, she didn't hold back on his acceptance as a member of Fairy Tail. Lead the way. As they walked throughout the streets of Magnolia, Naruto noticed that Mira Jane, despite not being overly active as a mage over the past months, was very much a familiar face to the people of the town. Well, that shouldn't have been much of a surprise because she was a famous person, always in the front page of Weekly Sorcerer, and had a very nasty reputation as a wizard. You wouldn't believe that I am walking beside a person who can wear the mask of a demon and terrorize her opponents, Naruto said, smiling ever so slightly. She looked like an innocent lady with a warm heart. Well, as far as he could see, she had a warm heart, but going just by appearances, he wouldn't believe that her other side existed. He'd never seen the woman fight, but he'd heard some intriguing rumors about her. Mira Jane Strauss, an S-rank wizard of Fairy Tail. She had a rivalry with Erza during those days, but now she was a grown woman with a kind smile. Still, she had a rather strong will. Naruto couldn't really compare with anyone from the world he used to live in, but the warmness that she exuded made him intrigued and very interested in knowing more about her. A source of light and someone beaming with happiness was needed in the miserable life that was of his. He wasn't living his desire in this world, and was plagued with fears of what might happen to the world he'd chosen to die for and the woman he left behind. It wasn't a choice for him to be here, and if it wasn't because of the heart in him, he would be looking for ways to get away quickly. But he disliked evil, he wanted to save people, he was a kind person, just a little deluded by the hatred he'd been forced to carry during the glorious days as the demon. So, he continued living, he continued to hold on just so he could at least do something right. It would certainly put on a strong hand over him if he manages to do much good in this world. Even if his efforts in the elemental nations were fruitless, he could at least have something to smile about, knowing that he hadn't lived a wasteful life. Neither do you look like anything people say you are, Mira responded quietly. If you continue to expand your fame, you might even replace me at the cover page of Weekly Sorcerer. Ow, isn't that for beautiful women only? Naruto asked lightly. He just said she was beautiful, but Mira didn't put much thought to it, it wouldn't do any good if she dug deep into it. Besides, he hadn't directly stated that she was beautiful. Maybe, Mira said. She wasn't active as a mage anymore, but her poses and fame kept her in the cover page. Naruto wasn't famous, he was infamous amongst guilds. From there was nothing but silence until they reached the guild. The silence wasn't too comfortable, nor was it awkward. It was enough for the two to reach into their thoughts without feeling something scratching their backs. Once they'd reached the guild, they were greeted by a fiery feast of brutal love and joy. Mira didn't mind at all as she just zipped past the commotion, on her way towards the counter, probably hurrying over to do the work she'd left behind. Naruto remained at the entrance, overlooking everything that was occurring. He hadn't seen so many mages since he first came here. It looked like almost everyone was back in the guild, and by the looks of things, there was a party to celebrate this happening. He was tempted to scare the crap out of the fairies, just so he could have a laugh. He hadn't played pranks in a long time, even though he used to do them for attention, he couldn't deny that they were amusing. Only hell when he had to clean up after everything. A smile crept into his lips as he thought of the perfect jutsu to use in this kind of place. No one was paying attention to him, except for Makarov, but he acted like he hadn't noticed. He could hide now, and turn this place into a dark room, with a malicious laughter echoing throughout the walls, and then light up some fireworks. Yes, that will certainly do. He never got the chance to do so though. A chair found its way onto his face, making his smile slip off. "MXM, he added. "Never mind," he said, walking towards Mira Jane. Makarov had narrowed his eyes while watching the blonde standing still at the entrance to the guild hall. Naturally, he remained quiet, while choosing to observe. Even with all the ruckus going around, and his small figure, the blonde had taken note of his presence the moment he entered. Makarov didn't fool himself to think otherwise. But that only meant that the blonde was more adept when it came to sensing magic, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to pick him out of everything happening around here. There were so many magic of all kinds being used, and that made it difficult to detect the one you're looking for if you don't have scent to go with. With all that Naruto has done and been doing, even though there was nothing that can be actually evil, or anything to suggest that he was a bad person, the Magic Council was surely going to be a pain in the ass for him. They were going to give him headaches with questions about the blonde in every turn he went. Why did he even allow for the blonde to be a member of his guild? Oh right, he saw something in his eyes when he was talking about not being in control of one's power and was pretty sure that there was nothing wrong with Naruto. More to that, the good things the blonde did for the towns being terrorized by monsters and evil people had reached his ears. Obviously, the council would disregard as nothing but a mask used to paint him like a good person. However, Makarov knew better than that. He wasn't cynical as those people. The Magic Council hadn't told them that he was a menace that needed to be removed. They'd only told them that he was a wizard without any reported allegiances, taking into his own hands to destroy dark guilds and labeled as a possible future threat. What was wrong in what the blonde was doing? Nothing. The only problem Makarov could point out were the methods being deployed by the blonde. But aside from that, there was no wrong. Once Naruto settled down, Makarov started speaking. "My brat's not troubling you?" he asked, sitting on the counter, just away from Naruto on the right side, with a large jug of beer close to him. "Not at all," Naruto responded with a shake of his head. "This kind of atmosphere is welcomed. The places I often found myself trapped within were much lonely, so having a few behind me is a nice change." A small, a bit sad smile stood firm on his face. Makarov took full notes in that bit of information before nodding. "I see," he said before taking a sip of his beer. Before he could speak again, he watched Naruto shake his head to orange juice and instead was brought 2 jugs of beer. He downed the first one in seconds, and went on to the other, before releasing a breath. This was just Kana all over again, Makarov thought mildly. "I didn't think you drank at all," Mira Jane said, a bit taken by surprise by how quick he had downed the contents of both jugs. Even Makarov was still pushing his own jug, but he had downed it like he was drinking pure still water. "People who drink don't prefer juice over beer," Naruto said in thought. "My head is a little crowded up, and every now and then, I require something strong. But it matters little, it would require all your barrels to get me drink." Mira merely shook her head. "So you don't drink to get drunk or anything?" Naruto shook his head. "I just do it to get something bitter on my gut, to match my thoughts," he added the last part with a small smile. Again, Mira shook her head and walked away. "So, what do you think of everything you're seeing, about fairy tale to be precise? You call everyone here your children, so I'm guessing this is your family. Anyone smart enough can tell what this is. Look at them, even though they fight, they are smiling. There is no animosity but happiness. I've never actually had something like this. When looking at it from afar, I want to be part of it, smile along with everyone." Naruto gave the best response he could give, in a somewhat forlorn tone. "Though, I think I'm a little too old to be doing what they are doing," he added with a smile. Makarov nodded, and then proceeded to scare off everyone before settling down to speak once all was calm. Finally, he started, "This is Naruto." He motioned his hands towards the blonde who had now turned to face everyone. "Naruto Uzumaki," the blonde added, giving away the family name that wasn't so much known to most people. A name was just a name, nothing about himself, hence he gave it away cheaply. Besides, what kind of colleague would he be if he can't even tell his friends his names? A successful family was built upon trust. He needed trust to be able to work efficiently in this place. Normally, Makarov wouldn't have bothered to introduce the blonde to the other mages, but this was a special matter that needed special attention. Naruto wasn't just a normal wizard after all. Naruto is going to be our new addition to the family. You may know him as the Phantom, or not know him at all, but treat him well. With that said, Makarov went back to savoring his beer. The Phantom. When looking at him, you really can't believe that it is him. The image in Weekly Sorcerer does paint a good image of him, but if you've only heard rumors, you wouldn't believe that it is him. Everything looked at, he looked like a normal wizard, not too strong, not too weak. Gray would have been excited, but the thought of another strong wizard joining their guild only complicated matters. When it came to Natsu, the pink-haired dragon slayer was going to grow even louder than before. The thought of it was enough to make him clench his fists and entertain pummeling him around. It wouldn't be so bad, especially with Erza away. He held himself though. "Oi, Natsu." Gray started, seeing his pink-haired partner in crime getting ready for round 2. He hadn't gotten his chance to battle with Naruto the last time. And he was probably fired up by hearing Phantom. The crazy dragon slayer was always looking to battle stronger opponents. Who better than the Phantom? Though Gray wouldn't act like Natsu, he too was interested in finding out if the man was as strong as it was rumored. "Where are you going?" Gray felt like hitting himself for asking a question he could answer himself without even thinking twice. "Ah, never mind," he murmured quietly. Looking around, everyone seemed to be interested in the blonde. Whether it was an introduction for the smirking Natsu or just the cat being a cat, Naruto didn't question it, he merely raised a brow in curiosity. "Yes, Salamander?" Naruto said, waiting to hear what the fire dragon slayer wanted from him. Though he probably had a good guess on what the boy wanted. The look on the eyes gave it all away anyway. "You're supposed to be strong, right?" Natsu started. "Prove it to me right here and right now that what they say about you is true, by fighting me." "No." Naruto shot down the dragon slayer with a straight face. "You're not too bright and strong enough to fight me," the blonde said dismissively. To add, he shushed the boy using his right hand and added, "Go play in the sand, or somewhere," sounded so bored and so uninterested. The dismissive attitude did nothing but raise a few chuckles in the expense of Natsu, even Happy laughed. Though, Natsu was too focused on Naruto to feel betrayed by his friend. Before he could respond though, Naruto twisted around, and just like that, he was inches away from him, staring straight into his eyes. "Of course, I'm just kidding," he said, smiling. Makarov definitely saw that one coming. He still shook his head though. "Don't do anything outrageous," he said mildly. "Let's do this now." Natsu shouted, spitting flames from his mouth, but Naruto shook his head. "No," the blonde said. "Now was a moment ago," he said. Natsu then noticed that Naruto's right palm was placed on his chest. "Challenge me after you've grown, then I'll bother fighting you." After those words left his mouth, Natsu was blasted away by an invisible and soundless blast that sent him rocketing away from the counter towards the wall parallel to the counter, and he broke through it in one swing. "I think I overdid it," Naruto said, but then shrugged. Well, from what I hear about him, he will be fine, he said, returning to his stool. Makarov shook his head at the attitude. Wind? He asked, to which Naruto nodded. But you do know you will have to pay for the wall you just broke, right? I just joined, and you're already making me pay for stuff? Besides, Natsu started it. Makarov shrugged carelessly, before moving on to another subject. Elfman is in, are you still up for what you said? If so, you can talk to him. Call him then, Naruto said, smiling. A day later. Concentration. It was one aspect that Naruto had in abundance. With everything that he did, he had to attain a deeper level of concentration. Without it, he may have been dead already. The concentration he had was gained through hours of meditation and high level of emotional control. He couldn't kill his emotions like there was a kill switch, but he could hide them to a place where no one could see. That is what Naruto liked about himself, the ability to control himself and every aspect about his being. Perhaps being infamously known as the demon god in the elemental nations and being that powerful had installed a god complex which made him seek ultimate control about his being. He wasn't satisfied adequate control over his power, his being, he was satisfied with perfect control over everything he was and is. It was only natural for a god to have supreme control over everything that he touches. What good was it to accept that he was God if he couldn't control what was inside of him? If he couldn't control what was inside of him, how could he control what was outside? Natural, given his character, his desire to be in control over his being didn't extend to other people. He had no desire to mindlessly control other people. Everyone had a free will, everyone had the right to choose. He may have been called a god, but he was not a god of people, but a god in terms of power. Sometimes Naruto thought some other god had also anointed him with special powers to be in such a level that he found himself to be in while he was causing much havoc in the elemental nations. But that was just a thought. He was now in the magic world, Earthland, stuck in a country called Fury. Tempting as life may be, Naruto still found the desire to move on forward in doing what was right. He could have given up already in the fight against evil. How many battles has he fought? How blood has he shed? How many people did he put through pain in the fight against the corrupt souls that bleached the air he breathed with a vile stench that just didn't come off, no matter how many times he tried ridding of it? He was still fighting because he had to. It was within him to continue. It wasn't just because he had nothing better to do. If he lost hope in humanity, he lost faith in himself, and he would change his ways. The world would never be the same after that. Naruto shook his head. He certainly didn't like the picture that was rooted in his mind when the thought of him becoming a true evil person surfaced inside his mind. Certainly, with all the power he had, he could do so many disastrous things. He could be like a walking natural disaster. The thought made him think of the Kyuubi, and that thought gave him a sad smile. Before he was even born, Kurama was called a natural disaster. Would he follow the same path? No, not to good people. He did wonder if his former friend was still alive and still grinning maliciously when the situation called for it. It wasn't often that he even missed that smile, those big silted, blood-red eyes, that had been so full of hate and bloodlust when they first talked. He missed everything about Kurama. Those wagging 9 tails, the deep voice that often called him out when he was falling into the depths of abyss. The laughter that had roared across his subconscious when he had said something stupid like saying it was better to give up. Everything accounted for, he really missed Kurama. What he had remaining of his former friend was his chakra. Magic was one thing. His own chakra was another, combined with Kurama's chakra, that was borderline hell, and heaven's powers mixed together. Still, Naruto wielded all these powers to satisfaction. He may have been irritated at first when his powers seemed out of control to the point where it could destroy his body if he released it all at once. To strengthen his body, a hardcore physical training was needed. But he didn't need a bulked-up body, he only needed a body that was far stronger than it appeared, so that he could handle all his powers. Naruto looked up in the clear sky. He was away from Magnolia, in the mountains for some personal time. He was happy to have such moments where he could feel the power inside of him welling up like an intoxicating drug driving him to a world of joy. The Phantom God held out his right hand. "Now then," he muttered before pulling out his power. Normally, he mixed magic with his chakra to create his lightning-based attacks. Elemental manipulation didn't come from his magical power, it came from his old powers. The power he gained from his hardcore training in the elemental nations. Magic was simply used to amplify it, while ensuring that he burned little chakra. In this way, he could fight for longer periods, as long as his body could maintain all the activities. But using all three sources created something powerful, lethal, and something godly. At first, he merely powered up. But this caused a change in the atmosphere, gravity to be precise. The overflow of power caused chunks of earth to be lifted up around him. The more he pooled his power, the more the rocks turned into dust. It wasn't all his powers he was releasing, he pooled out enough to use the jutsu he wanted to perform. The spell he frequently uses in eliminating dark guilds was lethal and dangerous. As of now, nothing had survived upon being hit by it. If he was in the elemental nations, it would be one of those jutsus classified as kinjutsu. This one had to be stronger than it since it had completed all his powers. Judgment of the Phantom God, the blonde clasped his hands together. A large round, dark orange magical seal formed up in the air. Lightning currents came busting around the seal. A second one formed beneath the first seal, a bit light in color, still orange. Both seals were connected by lightning currents. Not a second later, a white flash of energy blitzed from the seals, straight down the ground. The ground shook when the technique connected with the ground, and large amounts of dust were picked up around the area the technique hit. Naruto waited patiently for the debris to clear out so that he can see the results of his technique. It took a few moments, but the debris finally cleared. Naruto was rather impressed by the result of the technique. He hadn't expected the jutsu to give him this kind of result. There was a deep hole, around 50 meters wide. Naruto walked up to its edge to see how deep it was. It was deep, but not that deep. His experienced eyes could still see its bottom. But it was no matter, this was the first time he executed this technique this well. More practice will do, he mumbled lowly before going through hand seals. He then slammed his right hand on the ground, and waited for a few moments, before water finally began to fill the hole. When he turned around to leave, he was welcomed by a stare from Makarov. "Oh my, I hadn't sensed you there, old man." Probably because of the overflow of magic, he added in thought. "What brings you to this part of the town?" he asked, smiling a bit while walking towards the master of fairy tale. Makarov shrugged. "It doesn't matter," he said. "More importantly, what are you?" A more look of faint confusion appeared in Naruto's face for a few moments as he remained silent. He tilted his head a little before finally speaking. "Whatever do you mean by, what are you?" "I am what you see, isn't that enough?" "No, you're not as you appear," Makarov stated firmly, shaking his head firmly. "I see," Naruto said, appearing thoughtful for a moment. "I am the Phantom God." "If that isn't good enough, I don't know what will." He suddenly flashed behind Makarov in the blink of an eye. "I am still around in Fairy Tail. I just recently joined after all." He started walking away from the Fairy Tail master, while still talking. I've become a very curious person with age. Why don't we head back to the guild while you tell me fairy tales history? By the time they'd returned the guild, Makarov Drayar had already shed some light into the history of fairy tale. Naruto was able to learn a few things about the past two masters of the guild before Makarov, and some other things. The old man was too happy to share everything, so naturally, she didn't tell everything. Not that he was expecting the old man to tell it all, like the guild was like an open book to all who cared to look. Everybody had their secrets, and not everyone could be trusted. The Phantom was just a new mysterious member of Fairy Tail with no concrete background, and as Makarov had just discovered, there was more to him that meets the eye. Then again, when a man is rumored to be roaming around all lands fighting dark guilds, did you exactly expect everything to be normal about him? Only a fool would expect normality from a man who took his parade into the dark cities of the underworld. Makarov didn't so much trust him explicitly, and that was nothing short of what Naruto expected from the old. Only a naive fool would start by trusting a complete mysterious stranger. The old man welcomed him to his guild, but still kept an eye on him. His experience and duty as a father to his children is the reason the man accepted him into his guild. The master of Fairy Tail had finished talking about a few moments ago, but Naruto hadn't uttered a word since then. His careful eyes danced through the walls of the hall, looking through each mage his eyes could see. The eyes hidden in him could see the Etherion in the atmosphere, and that was what made him understand magic a little better than most. Naruto's glance met with the girl who always had a large jug or a barrel of beer on her side. She was an intriguing specimen. Kana. That was her name if he remembered collectively. A little bit of play with the ice and Naruto glanced to the other eyes. As his eyes moved around the guild, Makarov studied him idly at the corner of his eyes. He pretended like he wasn't looking though. However, anyone could feel the gaze of the old man asking a lot of questions. None that Naruto wanted to answer, not yet anyway. Seen something interesting? Naruto shrugged in response. Not particularly. His left eye caught the old man red-handed, but he showed no shame. Merely keeping his stare in response before looking away as he took another sip from his first, seemingly bottomless jug of beer. What did you mean by you have come curious with age? Makarov's tone was laced by firm curiosity. Though the old man still had eyes away from him when the question left his lips, Naruto could tell that the man wanted an answer. Adding before Naruto could respond, Makarov glanced at the blonde once again before speaking, "You don't seem that old. I'd say you were about 20, give or take." Back at home, due to the rigorous training his poor body was forced to endure, he looked older than his peers, simply because he had more built and was more reserved in confrontations compared to his former self prior walking the path of a legend. Upon being dragged into this magical world that was full of more mysteries, most dominated by one man, he had looked a bit younger. Nonetheless, it didn't mean he'd lived any less than the years he'd lived the elemental nations. The younger look had been because of the regeneration his body was forced to take so that it could recover from being torn by his killers. Even though he had buried the Gedo Mazo inside of his soul, it still put some changes into his body, barely noticeable though. When I said, curious with age, I didn't actually mean it literally. With age, I range where you assume. However, age doesn't actually define how long you have lived, does it? Figuratively, I mean. Some people are forced to grow up at a young age, experience adulthood while still wearing diapers. When you accumulate all the experience from young age, you realize that you've lived longer than most, simply because of what you've had to do with your life, Naruto explained lightly. It wasn't deliberate, even though he knew the response he fed the old man would only make him more curious and hit him with more questions. There was just no better way to offer a response the old man would find satisfying. Speaking from experience? That would be the first example of the questions set to follow because of the response he gave. Even so, he would continue to short and vague answers, like, yes, maybe. Naturally, Makarov frowned at this kind of secrecy, but he wasn't going to demand that Naruto tell him everything. Besides, the blonde seemed amused by something. Almost like he'd given that sort of response on purpose, and the careless way in which it was said made the old realize that he shouldn't think too much into the response he was been given when the blonde acted like that. Sighing, Makarov glanced at his beloved children from left to right. He cared for them, and would esner that they were protected by all means. Some of them had no one, and this was their family. The old fairy master turned his attention to the blonde on his right when he spoke. Taking in the silence, Naruto spoke before the old man could hit him with another question. The responsibility of a leader is always to look after his sheep. As a leader, you're the shepherd, and one who has to ensure that your children are led into the right path. You bear responsibility to their actions and fate. Naturally, you can't control and influence everything. There will always be that one that will always run away from your grip, no matter how hard you try. Nonetheless, it is upon a leader to look after each of his pupil, whether good or bad. Naruto smiled warmly, before looking far beyond the hall for a moment as he added. When I see how you look at your children, I'm led to believe that without doubt you would run after one of your children if they were lost. Surprised that the blonde could utter words so maturely, Makarov didn't let it show though, he just remained quiet. The old man took another sip, and finally the jug that seemed bottomless finally showed its bottom. He slammed it on the counter, and let loose of a breath as he swiped the bubbles on his lips. For someone so young, you speak as though you've actually gone through that, and your eyes tell me you've gone through a lot. But I just can't put my hand on it. Tell me, have you been a leader before? It is quite bothersome when something is so close and yet so far away. He was referring to the fact that he was there with the old man, but the answers he sought seemed far out of reach. Don't worry though, your instincts are correct. Though I do have a lot behind me, I am what you see. Makarov nodded, needing no words to confirm he'd heard the blonde clearly. To answer your question, no, I've never been a leader before. I dreamt of leading the village I was born. The dream faded with time, though. It didn't take a smart person to take note of the fact that Naruto didn't call the village was born in home. It didn't take Makarov 30 seconds to figure that there were issues there and the blonde just didn't consider the place that gave birth to him home. As he closed his eyes to store this bit of information at the back of his dependable mind, Makarov had to admit that there were a lot of things that he would eventually know about Naruto, and given his actions prior to joining Fairy Tail, he presumed there were nasty things. That thought made him swallow hard as he once again glanced at the blonde at the corner of his eyes. Do you still dream of being a leader? No, more precisely, what made the dream fade away? With how he talked, he seemed like he could be a great leader. I was a naive child when I had that dream, and I realized the truth when I grew up. The desire to lead from the heart is noble, but I chose a dream or a different path that has landed me here, and made me who I am. No lies, yet there were more things that were hidden. With each statement the blonde said, there were a few gaping holes that needed to be filled. It would have been fine if it was just one or two, but this was becoming too much. Makarov could see the grin of a severe migraine not from a far distance. You're strong, I cannot doubt that. But I'm you. Makarov trailed off when he noticed a slight momentarily change in Naruto's eyes. Something wrong? There is a change in the direction of the wind, but nothing harmful, nothing malicious, the blonde responded, eyes firmly glued at the entrance of the guild. Yes, how or why, the world around him began to feel dizzy. Makarov felt himself being forced into sleep, but he didn't allow the foreign power to completely take over his body. Mistogan, he mumbled. Though Naruto heard the old man, he didn't comment. Instead, he chose to observe around the hall as everyone fell asleep. If he remembered correctly, Mistogan was the mysterious and quiet S-class wizard of fairy tale. Not much was known about him, not even his face. This kind of unique entrance was suspicious and intriguing at the same time. Perhaps he should have his own dramatic entrance. That would be fitting for Kami. The blonde smiled when the hooded form of Mistogan slowly descended upon the guild. The man had walked in, with his eyes straight at him, but no word was said. Even when the blonde smiled at the man, he gave no response. Naturally, the blonde frowned, but said nothing. The wizard stopped just in front of him, eyes begging a question to be answered. These eyes of mine can see through illusions, but it doesn't make me immune to them, Naruto said. The man didn't walk away, he kept looking at him. The blonde sighed, yes, I am him. But no need to worry, I am a member of Fairy Tail now. I look forward to working with you some other time, Mistogan. The man looked at Makarov, who gave it a stoned nod. Not a second later, the man walked towards the request board and browsed for a few moments. Once done, he picked a poster and made his silent and invisible exit from the hall. Amen, and everything returned to normal. He does that every time. Doesn't want to be seen. Makarov answered Naruto's unanswered question. The blonde merely nodded and dragged his attention into his universal world of thoughts. Makarov noted but still spoke nonetheless. Now that you're a member of Fairy Tail, I'll expect that you refrain from doing anything that will give me a headache. I have enough with them. You mean like doing what I have been doing over the past months? Yes, and things like destroying public property. Given what I know of your abilities, nothing seems small scale. Your spells seem like those prepared for war and destruction. Ah, the irony in that, yet Makarov didn't seem to realize. Seeing another glance, Naruto spoke, ask and you shall receive an answer. A wide smile followed. Makarov shook his head at the theatry that followed. Why were you doing something like that? I understand that dark guilds shouldn't exist, but why you and why alone? Because I chose to do it and do it alone, Naruto said. Obviously, that wasn't enough for Makarov. There are so many people who suffer because of dark guilds, but unless the people have enough money to request a job, they continue to suffer. The Magic Council won't do anything, not unless the situation forces them. There are those with power to help, but no one really dedicates himself to be a defender of the weak, a hero of some sort. Ah, he got to play villain, now he was playing hero. What a life. So you chose to be a hero by risking your life. Not everyone is willing to go that far. Admittedly, even us who are good aren't dedicated to removing the evil from this world, not unless they bare their fangs against us. Naruto nodded, which is why exactly I made the choice. I had the power to do it, and the will to endure, so I went through it. It was good putting smiles of people's faces, made me sleep even better knowing that someone is laughing joyfully because I made a choice. That was at least a change that he welcomed with both his hands and heart. Scratch that, his entire being welcomed this change. The glorious demon days saw him make a lot of people suffer and cry in agony. He had bullied the nations, and the only one who smiled at him was Mei. But now good people smiled at him, thanked him for saving their lives, and it made him happy, and less miserable in the inside. That is good, but your methods remain questionable, and wrong to others. You mean the saying that everything dark the phantom touches disappears or turns to ashes, humans included? Naruto said, though he wanted to smile, he didn't because Makarov would get the wrong idea. It isn't just a saying, I have seen it, so have some people. How many people did you kill? Makarov's tone was low just so only Naruto would hear. A few, that was a gross misunderstatement. You don't understand my spell. Yes, it does make people disappear. And that lightning can turn everything to ash. However, if I add another layer to the spell, it doesn't kill people, but it does make people disappear. Makarov looked at him a bit sternly, explain. There is a spell I use called Timeless Void. If it zaps you, it takes you into a timeless world, or dimension, if you like. The void is one of my making and its core is a spell that attracts and repels. Everything that is bad won't leave, everything that is good will be spat out. Its purpose is to give people a chance to change. While inside, another spell forces you to relive your life, examine all you have ever done. Should you admit in your heart that you had lived wronged, and seek to change, you get flushed out. And if you don't? You remain there, forever. Makarov became silent. Well, he guessed it was no different than calling the void a prison. Those beyond change remained locked up while those capable of change were given a second chance to live right. How could he argue that what Naruto was doing was wrong? The core of the void worked like fairy law. I've never heard nor seen any spells you use. That is because they are creations of my own. When you have control over your magic and know exactly the elements of the magic inside of you, you don't need a spellbook create techniques, you just need an idea, and the capacity to give it form and shape. That isn't easy, Makarov sighed, once more. This confirms one thing. You're indeed as strong as they say you are. Besides, I've seen it with my own eyes. But that begs the question, how did you get so powerful young age? Hardcore training, Naruto simply said. So, you admit that I am strong, will you allow me to take S-rank jobs? His eyes were practically begging. You're not yet ranked, so no. Talk about crushing a guy's dream with one quick chop at the back of the head. The following day, Naruto strolled through the streets of Magnolia with a look that really told of a tale about a man in a faraway world. He was sure that he was about to have some peace and enjoy the time he has in the world of fairy tale. He didn't have a lot of things to do other than doing a few simple jobs every now and then. This was a lot easier compared to the kind of work he usually did when he was parading as the judge for those who do evil deeds that corrupt the world he currently lived in. The king didn't want much from him, but the man had said he would require his services every now and then. Naturally, if he accepted the job, he would be on the king's payroll, and the man paid a lot of money. This only meant that he wouldn't need to do jobs to be able to survive. He would still do jobs, but not for the pay. After all, he didn't want to feel like he was getting paid for doing what was right. Besides, he was brought into this world to do what is right and wrong in the sight of evil. Being on the king's payroll meant that he would have some tasks to do and it would gain him a lot of information. His decision to befriend the princess hadn't been a waste after all. Not to say he didn't value his friendship with Hisui, but life was bigger than Hisui, so was his purpose. When the Magic Council does choose to come to him, it would only mean that he would have connections with two powerful forces in Fury. How much of a progress would that be in the quest to remove evil from this country? Through hard work and dedication, loyalty and effectives, he could rise in the ranks in both royalty services and Magic Council services. With his friendship to Hisui, it wouldn't take long for him to be a trusted servant of the king. The Magic Council could prove to be a little tricky, but nothing was impossible, not to God. He would see how those people reacted to his presence, and then work on a good plan to get into their good graces and have them trust in his abilities. If he could achieve that, he would no doubt join them in their crusade. He had the power to be one of the 10 wizard saints, and the knowledge to surpass most mages in this country. To gain more knowledge about magic and demons, he would have to speak to the man who was magic. He would have to consult with Zeref. The man was special, and he couldn't hope to surpass the man in the knowledge of magic. He could only hope to learn from him. Since the dark mage seemed willing to converse with him last time, he didn't doubt the man would speak to him again. Only if the real dark wizard shows up. But with his powered-up self, the dark wizard will surely greet him as soon as he touches down at the island. If you continue wondering like that, you'll eventually get lost in your way, a voice suddenly said behind the blonde god. He'd been lost in the wonders of his thoughts that he didn't even sense the mages walk behind him. The train of thoughts really did wonders to a man who got chained up in one of them. Normally, sneaking up behind him took a lot of effort. Oh well, this wasn't the Shimobi world anyway. He didn't have to be watching his back with each step he took. I hadn't seen you there. Levy, was it? The blue-haired girl nodded, with her 2 bodyguards strolling just behind her, with looks aimed at Naruto, who acted like he was oblivious to them. I thought you would have forgotten already. Naruto smiled as the girl caught up to him. Not at all. I do make it a point to remember all the names I'm told. Besides, it wouldn't be good if I don't know the names of my fellow wizards, now would it? Well, it would have been understandable. You just joined recently, Levy said, before adding with a question. Did you belong to any guild before you joined Fairy Tail? If you don't mind me asking. She was a curious person, and to get things covered, she had to ask from the source itself since there was no information written anywhere else. No, Naruto said. Fairy Tail is my first. Well, not first in many sense of my life, but it is the first guild I've joined. I've always stayed up as a freelancer, going there and there throughout the country, the Bloon said, cupping his chin when he thought of firsts. He first got screwed by the redhead Mizukage. That woman had popped the cherry, and admittedly, she was the only woman he ever slept with. There was no one in his eyes from the Godam Mizukage. Even during his training trip with Jiraiya, he never got lucky, or even when he had returned to Konoha. How could he have gotten lucky if he was still dreaming sweet wet dreams, doing it dirty with his beloved Sakura-chan? Naruto snorted at the thought of his obsession with that violent pink-haired girl. She must be a woman now though. Freelancer, that would mean his life before he joined Fairy Tail. Were you like a wizard for hire? That is what freelancers do anyway. Instead of being part of a guild, they work alone, and demand a hefty pay for the services. Most of them are specialists and always did well in the assigned jobs. Naruto shook his head. No. Even if I were, no one could afford my asking. I am quite expensive. He was a god after all. With Kami walking amongst men, it was a lot of asking, and being Kami made him of a high rank. You didn't hire an S-class mage just to give him peanuts, did you? How expensive? He didn't seem like the type who'd ask for more. In response, Naruto merely smiled. Did you enjoy it? It was fun being able to move freely without anything binding you. Traveling around the country and meeting new people was always fun. But you had to be watching your back at all times. Without a strong will, you'll end up going nuts, Naruto added. For the time I had, I would say I enjoyed myself. But we must all grow up when the time comes. Levy nodded. She was curious. What was it like fighting dark guilds for a living? How did he fare when he found himself surrounded by an entire guild? Was it actually true that he could wipe out an entire guild and leave nothing behind? So, she started, glancing sideways. Are all rumors about you true? What rumors? You must be precise so that I can give you a fair response. It won't completely satisfy her curiosity, but it will be enough to keep occupied for the time being. Well, there is that rumor about you destroying dark guilds, and that one about you helping you out people. That was the nicest way Levy could put it. She couldn't exactly say, is it true that you walk around killing dark mages? Though, the killing can still be argued, but he does destroy things. Still not precise, Naruto said. Most of the rumors are true, he added. I do find it to be refreshing helping out those in need. The fact that someone is tormenting means that they don't have the power to protect themselves. It is up to those with the right mindset and power to free them from their shackles. That must be exactly why Master allowed you to get into the guild, Levy said a bit lowly. Makarov wouldn't really appreciate a killer to infest the guild. There was no telling what kind of delusion he would bring to his children, and the Master liked them as they were, free spirits. Apparently, Naruto said. They continued to walk through the quiet streets with two of Levy's bodyguards following them behind. The two chatted about this and that, mostly about the job Levy had been doing with her partners. Along the way, Naruto did question the two of her partners' attitudes. Unfortunately, she didn't have a good answer, but the blonde did have a good guess. They finally reached the guild, and Naruto was surprised at how quiet it sounded. Ever since he joined, he hadn't found the guild to be this quiet around this time. The only time the walls rested from the noisy occupants was when they were outside doing jobs, or just strolling around the town. He could feel that there were mages inside, but just a little quiet. Does it get like this sometimes? When Laxus is here, or when Erza is in a good mood, Levy said as they made it through the entrance. The redhead S-rank wizard was delivering her lectures to the Entra Guild while Makarov and Mira Jane chatted about this and that. It was a bit of a surprise to Naruto, but he sneaked his way through without letting anyone, leaving Levy and her friends behind. The strict principal has returned, I see. He said to both Makarov and Mira. She only returned a few moments ago and she is already at work, Makarov said, taking a sip from his jug, containing the usual thirst reliever, beer. It was always like this when she was in the mood. And they listened to her well. Naruto said, seeing how tense the fairies were and how they were obediently nodding to everything she was saying. He couldn't blame them because the air around her seemed rather intense. You wouldn't guess just by looking at her that behind that armor was a beautiful woman who seemed rather sweet. When she wasn't wearing anything, she was this precious jewel, that Naruto couldn't help but thank Jiraiya for the wonderful training he offered him. He may not have appreciated it then, but he did now. It's either that or a brutal beating. Naruto felt that the way Mira said it, and with the smile, it was wrong in many ways. Well, the beating wasn't considered to be anything but the usual. So now I'm left with Guildarts, the blonde said. He'd already met Laxus-chan, Erza, and had seen Mistogan. Plus Mira Jane. These were the wizards that made Fairy Tail a guild to join. Not to forego it the up-and-coming salamander, and who could forget the stripping gray. It will take some time before he returns, he has been gone for a long mission. Well, the man never stayed for too long when he does return. But Makarov wasn't complaining that much. Guildarts was a grown-up man after all. I will meet him eventually. Naruto twisted around to face Mira Jane. He smiled wonderfully at the white-haired wizard. So, Mira, what do you say to doing some with M? He trailed off when his senses went off. Master. Erza's voice was closer, and the usual was being served behind him. I trust your mission was successful, Makarov said, in more of a statement than a question. Well, he was talking to Titania, and she wasn't the one to mess up on a job. Yes, she did go overboard most often than not, but she succeeded in her missions. Yes, Erza said. Good, Makarov smiled. I'd like you to meet someone, he said, motioning to Naruto, who was sitting on his right. The blonde turned around and held out his right hand. This is Naruto. Hello, Erza. Erza appeared to shake his head for a moment before her eyes narrowed. You. Ah, crap, Naruto cursed when the red-haired moved faster in the wake of her change in expression. Her firm right hand gripped his face forcefully before she lifted him up and slammed him down the counter, breaking through it. Erza followed this by placing her right foot on the blonde's chest. The background was followed by complete silence while Makarov didn't appear to be concerned. In fact, his response was, "Do you two know each other?" No, Erza said. She couldn't say they knew each other, but they had met before. I would have been complang about that kind of welcome, but the view down here is quite lovely, Naruto said, speaking of the view under her skirt. Aside from that, I'm Naruto and I'm a fairy tale mage. That put away all her other thoughts as she turned her attention towards Makarov. Really? She sounded a bit surprised by this revelation. Makarov nodded. He joined not too while ago, he said. Naruto was already on his feet. Ah, my chair is busted, he said. Say old man. No, Makarov said. Whatever you thinking? No, he clarified. He was sure the blonde was going to ask something just by the look on his face. Even Erza was here, she wouldn't agree with it. Well, with his reputation, it could go either way. You haven't even heard what I want to say, Naruto complained, a bit childlessly. Hear me out, and I assure you that you will like it. He was always coming up with brilliant thoughts after all. It was natural for them to be liked. Come on with it, then, Makarov said with a sigh. Despite my fearsome reputation, you won't allow me to walk up the stairs because I have not been registered to this guild as an S-rank wizard. I don't want to be bored doing jobs that don't give me a kick. So, if I can prove my worth, will you allow me to do good jobs? No, Makarov said. However, the thought is good as I want to see you fight against someone of Erza's caliber. You don't deny being powerful, rumors are flying over, but the only proof we can get is seeing it through our eyes, plus what he had sensed that day wasn't child's play. It wasn't natural for a single human to possess such magic, but Naruto didn't butt when he asked. No deal, Naruto said. However, if you're really curious about my strength, I will tell you about it sometime. I haven't even told you more about my past. Fairy, a few days later. While wind was his natural element, the one he could control effortlessly, Naruto didn't use much of it. He was often using lightning and fire. Fire didn't pack a punch as much as lightning did. The thunder element was truly good for wide-range jutsus that could make things vanish, which is why he preferred using it. Besides, he couldn't really hold back when using wind, and despite it being his natural element, he didn't have flashy spells like he does with lightning. Still, his wind has proved to be capable of cutting through anything. It has never disappointed him in his life, not when he was faced by thousands of shinobi all looking to delicately skin him alive. It was because of the wind element that he never had to suffer from injuries like losing a leg or any part of his body while he was fighting to win. But that didn't mean that he didn't have battle wounds. He had them. Everyone who has fought great battles has them. He may have been a god in power, but he still possessed the body of a mere human. The delightful blue cat greeted the blonde as Natsu walked over to him. Happy. Naruto smiled at the creature floating just away from him. Would you become a normal cat if I removed your wings? The blonde asked nicely. Happy looked terrified by the thought of having his precious wings removed. These were the wings that had saved his and Natsu's life so many times. They were the wings that made him feel special. What would become of him if he lost his wings? Just a normal Neko. That was just a death punishment. Without wings, he wouldn't be happy anymore, but just a cat. He would probably even lose his ability to speak. What are you working on, Naruto? Natsu asked, looking at the scroll in front of the blonde. Obviously, the blonde was working on something as he wasn't even sitting on his favorite sport beside the counter, but he was at a corner, away from everyone. Magic, Naruto simply said. What kind of magic? He hoped it was fire magic. Naruto held out his right hand. The pink-haired across him waited patiently for the magic to be revealed, but nothing happened. I'm still working on it, the blonde said, smiling as he did. In this kind of day and time, not many people actually believe that dragons ever existed in this world. Real dragon slayers were raised by dragons, yes? But from what I gather, the dragons all disappeared. Is it the same for you? Yes, Igneel disappeared without a word when I was younger. Do you know where he went? Do you know something about it? Hopefully, the blonde knew something because he was asking about it. No, unfortunately, Naruto said. He could see that Natsu wasn't happy about that. It was understandable that the boy be saddened by it.
Naruto wasn't going to offer comfort either.
Which year was it? July 7th x 777. Same year, same month and day, Naruto mumbled to himself in thought. This was a great mystery that needed to be solved. And to do that, he would need to visit Zeref again. The man was history of this world, and Naruto was going to take advantage of their current relations to squeeze information out of that man. Their disappearance has left them with little more than fairy tales, Naruto said. Dragons are real. Natsu shouted strongly, hitting the table between he and Naruto. His little action caused the others to stare, but not more than a second later, they returned to their usual business. I didn't say they weren't real or just mere fairy tales, Naruto said. I'm just saying that because they all disappeared just like that, society today hasn't seen them. To them, they are just tales of the past, relics of the years gone by. However, because you're a real dragon slayer, you're proof that dragons indeed existed in this world. Though, I'm deeply curious why they disappeared. I have been trying to search for Igneel since he disappeared, but I have never been able to find him. I still know he is alive though. Natsu's tone was firm. Naruto smiled. Most likely he is still alive, the blonde said. Well then, I must go, the blonde said before standing up. Where are you going? Get some training done. I need to experiment on a few things before hitting the job board. His magic wasn't that low level. So he needed to learn and practice small-scale magic that would be safe to use when dealing with opponents he didn't have to kill. It would be bad if he ended up killing mages by accident. Can I come with? That sadness was all but gone.
I don't see a problem.
Perhaps I may even get the chance to see the Salander in action. I have been itching to smack something around anyway, the blonde said smiling. The two didn't go far as the doors suddenly bust open as the Rune Knights walked into the guild, looking all high and mighty. Naruto merely shook his head at the kind of behavior. He had problems with people who acted all high and mighty around him. No one was allowed to act superior to him before they defeated him in battle. After all, he was a god walking amongst man. Looks like we will do this some other time, Natsu, Naruto said walking up towards the knights who were looking around. No doubt looking for the phantom, being on the wanted list of the Magic Council. Are they here for you? It wasn't Natsu who responded, but Makarov. It didn't surprise Naruto as the man would know being one of the 10 wizard saints and his master. Yes, the old man said. It isn't a big deal. They are just going to sort out a few things. That was hard to believe. When the Magic Council came for you, it was a big deal. For Makarov to say that when someone like Naruto was being requested by the Magic Council was a massive misunderstatement. Then Naruto said, hands folded across his chest, looking at the knights expectantly. You're to come with us to the Magic Council HQ. The tone had been so forceful that if he had been a puppy, Naruto would have been crying for his mom. But the blonde was the alpha male, he didn't back down. And knowing that the council wasn't looking to arrest or persecute him, he could as well fool around. Besides, these people needed to learn of their places. Before Naruto could speak, another spoke again. If you're not cooperative, we will have to use force to make you come with us. Ho? Naruto cocked his head a little. Do you think you can make me? Makarov shook his head slightly. While they couldn't make him do anything they wanted, Naruto shouldn't be doing things like this. He didn't know exactly what the Magic Council wanted with Naruto, all he knew was that they wanted to speak to him. That was what he was told when he went on to report the blonde's presence in his guild. You would dare defy the Magic Council? No one did that. The rule of the council was law. Whatever they said had to happen. When they summoned you, you had to run as quickly as you could. Who did this man think he was? I hear it a lot that one can never go against the Magic Council. So why didn't we test this theory then? Naruto said, his eyes glowed a bit. Gravity did what it did best, dragging the knights down the ground, onto their knees. When you give your report, tell them I made you kneel before me. The blonde walked past the knights, he spoke again as he disappeared. I will move ahead of you. Better run fast if you're gone get to the HQ in the same time as me. When he disappeared, gravity stopped working. The knights recovered their breaths. They didn't linger around the guild as unnerving stares were directed straight at them, telling them to try something. I just invited trouble to my guild, Makarov mumbled, feeling the heat that was about to come from the Magic Council because the troublesome person Naruto was. The blonde was going to reach the council before the Rune Knights, and by the time they get there, Naruto will probably be done with his talks. The intimidation had been done purposefully. Magic Council HQ. Days were never the same, some were good and some were bad. This was the story of everyone who was alive. Ultear was no different. What made things differ for her was that even when things didn't go according to plan, she always had something to smile about, that punching bag she could use to vent off her frustrations. While this one started like just another usual day, it has turned out to be quite the day. Uzumaki Naruto. He was mockingly kneeling before her fellow councilmen. She could actually see that the kneel he'd given was nothing more than a mock show of mock respect to the Magic Council. The blonde absolutely had no respect for them, and certainly wasn't the type to be taking orders from the kind people the council was. She knew firsthand that he had a hidden complex about him that made him view a lot of things to be below them. Just by giving the council a mock bow show volumes of what he thought of them, and only two others aside from her could tell. One of the two who could tell, Seagrain, only appeared to be amused by the idea of a wizard showing such lack of respect to the council. It wasn't a necessity for him to bow, but to do to it and actually manage to do it in a mocking way while pulling a lid over the old fools into thinking he was being submissive was a splendid work of theatry. I was recently informed by a squad of Rune Knights that I was to appear before the Magic Council. I ran as quickly as I could when I received the message, and even managed to leave the messenger bearers behind. Naruto started in a calm, controlled tone. The blonde spread his right hand out a bit, as he continued. That being said, Uzumaki Naruto has come. Ultear almost giggled when the blonde showed his face while he stood up straight. He had a certain love for fooling around and the desire to be in control in the flow of things. The pace of the conversation they were going to have would depend on how he responded to the questions. The only woman in the Magic Council had a feeling that this was going to be a blast, and the blonde would do what many have been afraid to do. Naruto had showed her he wasn't afraid of anything after all. The chairman stared at the phantom for a good minute. He was smiling, and he shouldn't be smiling. It was a bit unnerving to see such a smile in their presence, especially in this kind of situation. Still, it was nothing compared to what he's had to deal with in the past. Uzumaki Naruto, you say? Who are you really, and where do you come from? Naturally, Naruto knew that by the tone being used by the chairman that it was either he answered or the man would try to force him to answer the question. The blonde cupped his chin, appearing in thought. I am Uzumaki Naruto and I come from this country, Fury. I used to live in the mountains with my parents before they sacrificed their lives to save mine. From then. Not much detail offered. The chair got into that quickly. Details, he demanded. There isn't much to tell really. The activities that I did dated back 6 months before I moved to the capital. Before that, I didn't do anything, but kept living my life in isolation. Before anyone could say anything, Seagrain spoke. We have been watching you. Naruto gave no reaction to that statement, almost like he didn't hear it. Your activities have been rather interesting. This was the main subject that needed to be dealt with. Besides, they'd called him here to recruit him, not ask questions. You think? Naruto asked with his head cocked a bit. Why were you attacking dark guilds? Is there a need for me to answer that question? The answer is obvious really. That question being referred to me is no different than you asking me why I punished criminals that were being left to roam around the country, using magic for all kinds of evil things. Well, that is what you're asking me. Naruto paused for a moment before asking. Was I supposed to allow magic to be abused when there is no one to deal with such activities? The alarms went off as Naruto received some nasty stares. What is that supposed to mean? Are you saying we aren't doing our jobs in governing magic and all those who use it? The little be careful on how you answer as you may be thrown in a pit followed as the atmosphere became a bit tense as Naruto no longer had the smile to deflate it. Not at all. I wouldn't dream of insulting the council like that. I do apologize if I made it sound like I was, Naruto said. I'm merely stating out that I saw that there were a lot of criminals on the loose and many people were suffering because of them. So, I decided to use my power to put an end to it. Naturally, I attacked those dark guilds that were actively making innocent people suffer. How noble of you. That may have been sarcastic, but Naruto didn't read much to it. During my activities, I learned that there was much that I couldn't deal with alone. This is why I have a proposal for the Magic Council, Naruto said, his smile returning again. He was just using the information she gave him to his advantage. Ultear could safely assume what offer he wanted to propose to them. It was the same offer they wanted to give him. What proposal? I am willing to offer my services to the council to hunt down anyone who the council deems to have done wrong. I believe that this council is doing a good job and I would like to offer myself for its use, Naruto said, almost passionately. Ultear was in love, now it was confirmed. Naruto was making this look he was offering himself to the Magic Council for it to use him, when he knows full well that they were going to recruit him to keep him closer to their watch. Later. Ultear, Seagrain called the woman, causing her to stop. What do you think of that fellow? What do you mean by that? Ultear asked nicely with a smile playing on her polished lips. It was a pity that the man before he didn't see her as a woman but his loyal subordinate, otherwise, he would be rolling all over her hand whenever she smiled, but she was content with the current facade. You seem to be attracted to him, he lacked a better word to use. He had noted her eyes while they were facing that blonde man, and she never seemed to get enough of staring down at his form. Ah. Ultear cupped her chin as she walked side by side with Seagrain, heading towards their offices. He is an interesting person, don't you think? The blue-haired didn't need to think about it to nod in agreement. There hasn't been far more of an interesting person to appear before the Magic Council other than that man. While he appeared to humble himself before anything else, he had exhumed a superior attitude when negotiations had been completed, and had walked out of their sight, head held high, shoulders firm. To make matters interesting, disappeared with a burst of a bright light that had everyone shielding their eyes. He thought there was a message in that, but he couldn't figure out much about it. Naruto's method of leaving the presence of the council was no different than giving them middle finger. He is interesting, and seems much more powerful than he appears. I also get the feeling that he knows that aside from their weapons and authority, those councils aren't that powerful, Seagrain stated. This explained a lot about his blatant lack of show of contempt towards them. It appears that way and makes him much more interesting, Ultear said calmly. Just don't get involved too much, Ultear. You don't know what you're dealing with. Hi. Ultear responded calmly as Seagrain turned with the corner while she went straight ahead towards her own office. The fool was the blue-haired and she was the smart one. He didn't even know who he was dealing with when it came to her. How could he handle someone like Naruto? Though, she was curious of what was going on inside that little head of his. Oh well, it was of no matter. She had what she needed. I figured that I would find you waiting for me, making yourself comfortable in my office, Ultear said, stressing the words. The blonde was going through her shelves, going through her book collection. Sorry, I just couldn't help myself, Naruto said, turning to face Ultear. He had a book on his right hand, which she recognized. He appeared to be genially sorry for making himself too comfortable in her office and going through her stuff in her absence. This wasn't the first time that the blonde had been completely honest when speaking to her. He was comfortable enough to do that, and she couldn't. What gave him the confidence to be like that? She was always wearing a mask, never revealing much of what she thought inside of her dark heart, if she had one, but he wasn't afraid to show her a genuine smile. Ultear shook off the thoughts. That was some play you put there. I didn't think you would willingly offer yourself to be used by the Magic Council, when you don't have a high opinion of it, she said before sitting at the edge of her desk. It was necessary, Naruto said before adding. If I had refused, they would have made my life a living hell, and I don't want that. I will soon have enough trouble running watching my back from dark guilds. Having the Magic Council behind my back would only worsen things. He still had Jose of Phantom to worry about. That man will surely not accept his complete rejection slide so easily. Aligning with the council meant the man wouldn't do anything stupid. Still, Jose was the least of his worries. Well, you could have come to me then, and I could have offered you my protection, Ultear said, folding her hands across her chest. You still have dark guilds to worry about though. Do you need help with any of that? Naruto shook his head. No, he said. But should anything come, I know who to call. Again, he gave her a smile that seemed real. It felt like he was happy to know that there was someone he could call when things were going bad for him. Why do you do that? Finally she asked as it was starting to dig holes in her mind. That is because I'm a nice person, Ultear-san, Naruto said walking up to the woman. He stopped just away from her, but didn't invade her personal space like he usually does. Yay right, Ultear snorted. There was really no need in playing the nice person with him since he already knew she wasn't. You mean it was nice of you sneaking into the princess's life just so you can get some attachment with the royal family? Well, you did get rewarded by the king himself. She added with a smile of her own. Are you that twisted to assume something like that? Naruto said, almost in a sad tone. The frown on his face didn't make Ultear happy either. Well, isn't that the truth? Naruto shook his head. No, he said. That is something that you would do, Ultear-san. But I'm not that kind of person.
Unlike you, I have things that I care about.
Are you saying that I care for nothing? Naruto didn't answer the question.
He took a step closer to Ultear, and leaned over to her face.
He lifted her chin, staring deep into her eyes. I have stared into the eyes of the devil, and I have seen so many things, but I've never seen a human with so much hatred. You may hide things well, but the devil once lived inside of me. There was a time when I wore the mask of the devil. So, I can sniff anything that is appealing to the devil. Ultear cocked her head a little, while never breaking eye contact with the blonde. What do you want? Nothing much, Naruto said. Someone like you shouldn't be in the Magic Council. You're not a good person. So, why are you in the council? Ultear smiled. That is my business, isn't? She said. I have been meaning to ask you this, but where are you really from, Uzumaki Naruto? Or even from this country? Naruto put on a flat smile, made some breathing space between himself and Ultear. Would you believe it if I told you I come from the heavens? And was sent to this world by an angel of the Lord to be a hero of justice? Yea, Ultear said sarcastically. Are you interested in Zeref? Finally, she asked something she knew she would get a response. Yea, Naruto said before adding. When you take away the evil side from him, you're left with a man who revolutionized magic. Zeref may have been a dark wizard, but when it came to understanding magic and executing it, he was a genius. Who in the world today can create life like he did? Just so you know, studying black magic is considered illegal and it will land you in the cells below this building, Ultear said, getting the feeling that the blonde took as much interest in the dark wizard as he appeared. It wasn't that she wanted him to stop if he was thinking of it, she just wanted to see his reaction.
Naruto shrugged with a smile. Well, I have you to bail me out if things turn south, the blonde said.
He held out his right hand. A black smoke gathered around his palm, making Ultear narrow her eyes. Just so you know, I studied it. My intentions were never to actually use it, I just wanted to learn it. But recently I just thought, why not test my limits? What does that do? Nothing really, Naruto said. So tell me, Ultear-chan, do you think Zeref was an interesting man? Fairy tale. Everything was well set for him to begin. God knows what he had to achieve in this world. Dark guilds were a threat to the peace of this world, so they needed to be eliminated. But they weren't the only threats. Zeref had the potential, and then there was Acnologia, the mystery behind dragons as well. More worrying was the fact that he didn't have all the information he needed, and the thing that brought him to this world had disappeared without a trace. Dead, it said, but Naruto didn't know what to believe. He had the utmost confidence in his power, but the more he wandered throughout this world, the more he realized that it had a lot of powerful beings. In the elemental nations, cages proved the frontrunners and some few shinobi, but in Earthland, there were a lot of strong magic users. He didn't even know if he could still reach that triple S class again. There was no shame in being cautious, as he didn't know what he was dealing with. Zeref was an immortal godly man, in terms of power. He knew nothing concrete or tangible about the power of Acnologia, nor about the dragons who disappeared. Being on the services of the Magic Council, a member of Fairy Tail and the payroll of the ruler of Fury gave him the field of work he needed. Back already? Mira asked quietly. For someone who was summoned to the presence of the Magic Council, he returned a lot quicker than she had anticipated. A normal person would have taken a day or two, but it only took him a few hours. Yay. That is the good thing about being able to use teleportation magic, Naruto said, brightening up a little. I don't have to spend hours traveling when I'm going somewhere I've been before, unless I feel like it. Mira silently absorbed the answer before asking, "So, you've been to the Magic Council HQ before," she said. That is what he implied by saying he didn't need to travel hours when heading somewhere he's been. That also meant that he could only teleport to a place he knows. Yay, Naruto said. I went by the place a couple of times when I was sightseeing. The white-haired mage across him shook her head at his response. He was definitely not sightseeing. There was something he was doing. You know, most of us just want to stay far away from the Magic Council. It is understandable. It may just pull you over and frame you for something you didn't do just to serve one of their motives, Naruto said carelessly. The council really did abuse its power. As far as he can see, only one or two were fit to be in the Magic Council. You're not fond of them, are you? Well, they didn't exactly do much that can have one liking them. The council could be cruel at times, but who was going to complain and to whom? Naruto didn't hide his low opinion of the Magic Council. No, he said. When you are in power and authority, you're not supposed to misuse it for your own personal gain, more precisely when you're in a seat of good, and protecting people as well as maintaining order in the magic world. The current council, at least the majority of it, are only there to push their own agendas. You're not supposed to talk like that, Naruto. If anyone with connections to the council hears about this, you could get into trouble. This is exactly what I am talking about, Mira. People are so afraid of the council because it has turned to be tyrant that can't be opposed. Everything it says is law, whether it is good or bad, no one questions it. You all just accept it. Why? Because it is the Magic Council, but what was the council formed for to begin with? Be careful that you don't end up doing something stupid because of those thoughts, Makarov said, joining in with the conversation. While he couldn't say Naruto didn't have a point, a lot of them have just kept their sights off the council and focused on where they wanted to head to. There was always one winner when you picked a fight with the council. I'm not planning on doing something stupid, old man. But when something is wrong, I will say it and oppose it. What kind of a good person am I if my goodness is only selective to the things that don't have the Magic Council's touch? Naruto asked. Makarov shook his head. He wasn't planning on getting into this kind of debate with the blonde. I assume things went well. If they hadn't, he wouldn't have returned so quickly. Yes, Naruto said. We worked out a few issues between us, and you're looking at a special officer of the council. I get to work on the field like Rune Knights. Though, my missions will be specialized. On the other side, they get to manage your activities and keep track of your movements, Makarov said mildly. Naruto didn't seem bothered by it though. It got him curious, but he didn't ask. Yap, Naruto said. Seems like you're going to receive more heat from the council. They are already giving you headaches because of your mage's behavior outside, and now there is the phantom. Makarov frowned. Don't remind me, he said before turning to Mira. Where is Erza? She went away, Mira said. Do you have a job for her? Yes, Makarov said. Would you do it, if it was offered to you? He asked Naruto. Naruto shook his head. I have a trip to take and I must also get my sword serviced, Naruto said. I will most likely be gone for a week. Erza is still in town, right? Mira nodded. I will go look for her. Before Naruto could leave, Makarov gave the blonde a firm glance. You and I have to talk, seriously. Do you prefer before or after this trip of yours? After, Naruto said. He added. My mind should be clear enough to talk by then. He offered the old man a small smile before leaving.
So that's it for today. Tell me if you want next part in the comments section. Till then, take care.